Tonight it's truly cold, isn't it? I'm sitting here in the studio looking out the window and I see a light snowfall, not unlike the night in the story I'm about to tell you. This week I received a rather special email. The sender is Greg Grapp, a scout leader from the north. He wrote that he didn't know what to tell the parents of the children in his troop after their recent trip. I think you should hear this story for yourselves. All right, let me read Greg's letter verbatim. To Jeff and the listeners, I took my scout troop up north for them to earn their winter camping badges. Now, I don't know what to tell their parents anymore. Greg farted. No, I just farted, you jerk. Anyway, whoever smelt it dealt it, right, Dad? Greg, stop farting in everyone's faces and reread the winter camping badge regulations so the whole troop knows what they're supposed to do this weekend. I already read them. Then read them again. Steve isn't listening. I can hear him snoring from here. Steve, wake up. My dad said so. Murph, wake up, Steve. We're rereading the rules just for you. Okay, Uncle Greg, I'm awake. To earn the winter camping badge, a scout must pitch a tent in the snow and sleep outdoors overnight during the winter months. They must wear enough warm clothing at all times, and the troop leader will check. While the boy read the rules, I let my mind wander a bit and looked out at the road ahead. Snow was piled high on both sides of Highway 7, the road was slushy but had been plowed well. The scenery here in winter was completely different. I mused to myself, I'd only ever been up to the cabin in summer. For as long as I could remember, every year I went north to Lake Bronze. Our family cabin was at the end of a narrow peninsula, like a grassy path leading to our tiny hut. No electricity, no running water, no heater. We'd have to chop our own wood and build a fire to keep warm. But the forecast was pretty mild, and we had plenty of blankets and warm clothes. Always be prepared. That's what they always say, so we brought everything. As a kid, I also earned a winter camping badge and had fond memories. We hiked, threw snowballs at each other, roasted marshmallows around a campfire. But this time was different, I suddenly realized, a wave of anxiety rising. Back then, I went to a scout camp with lots of people around. Not to mention there were heated cabins to go into if it got too cold. The van had enough gas and could be used for warmth in an emergency. Unless it breaks down, a voice echoed in my head. I tried to push it away. Right, Dad. I realized my son was talking to me while my mind had drifted. What, Greg? I said we're almost at the turn. I nearly missed it but managed to slow down and turn onto the gravel side road. Here we are, about 15 more minutes. Are you boys excited? Yes, a timid reply came from the back. Suddenly, all 5 of them fell silent. Could they sense my apprehension? What do you want to do first when we get to the lake? Ice fishing or a snowball fight? Snowball fight? The chatter began again, and I was glad to hear them talking, at least seemingly excited. The side roads were icier and slicker than the highway, so I slowed down significantly. I heard Gibson whine in the passenger seat and reached over to stroke his fur. Our old cocker spaniel was getting on in years but always loved coming to the cabin. Even so, he seemed worried too. Maybe he just needed to go to the bathroom. Almost there, Jibai, I soothed. My words didn't reassure him. Instead, his ears perked up and he suddenly sat upright in the passenger seat, his eyes wide, staring straight ahead. I looked through the windshield just in time to see something tall and thin lurch into the woods ahead. It disappeared into the trees and couldn't be seen as we drove past. A hunter, I guessed, just very tall. The fellow had to be 7 feet tall. Gibson lay back down in the seat, and I turned onto Brookside Road. This road was even less maintained. Sparse plowing meant the car occasionally slipped on black ice. Continuing on this road for a while, I looked for the sign for Drier Road. The gravel path would turn into 2 dirt tracks in the grass. When we reached that turn, in winter, with snow covering the ground, we wouldn't even have that. I wondered if I'd be able to drive up the hill leading to the cabin or if we'd have to walk a kilometer from there. Here we are, boys, I announced when I saw the blue sign they'd put up last year. Drier Road? Gibson sat up and looked too, and all the kids in the back went silent. We'd been driving for hours, and they were eager to see the cabin where we'd stay for the weekend. I was surprised to see the gate wide open. Mr. Drier must have forgotten to close it. His property was along the road, along with a few other cabins. We all knew each other. I wondered if anyone was ice fishing on the lake. It would be a relief to have other people around in case of an emergency. Seeing a car parked next to Mr. Dryer's cabin brought a wide smile to my face. I wouldn't be the only adult in charge on the lake this weekend. Even without interacting, their presence alone was reassuring. I rolled down the window as we passed. As we drove past, I saw Mr. Dryer stepping out of his cabin. He looked like he was packing his car to leave. My heart sank, I realized. There went our backup. "Mr. Dryer, did we just catch you before you left?" I called out the window. He seemed surprised to see us. He walked quickly to his car, hurried to put a suitcase inside, then came to the driver's side of our van, taking small, quick steps to avoid slipping on the ice. "Hello, young Grap, and the scout troop too. It's good to see you boys here." He looked anxious, and his eyes stared intently into mine. "Could you help me carry a few things out? I'm getting old, and my arthritis is acting up terribly in this cold weather." "Of course," I said. It was strange. I hadn't talked much to him, but I was happy to help. I got out of the car after pulling the handbrake and left the engine running to keep the kids warm while I helped Mr. Dryer. Following him inside, he closed the door behind us. "Listen," he said, "this is a mistake. You shouldn't be here, go back. Make up some excuse, say anything, but don't stay the night." The old man's lost his mind, I suddenly realized. What the hell was he talking about? "What do you mean, Mr. Dryer? We just got up here. We drove 5 hours to get here." I started backing away as he convulsed, and I saw a bit of foam trickle from the corner of his mouth. I fumbled for the doorknob behind me. I turned to look, and he had already lunged, grabbing my collar and pulling me towards him. He yelled in my face, his features red and tears streaming. "Don't stay the night. I beg you." The owl watches as the greedy wolves, never sated, and the wild fungi run rampant. I pushed him away and ran back to the van, tugging the door handle, my feet slipping on the ice, almost falling. I grabbed the door and tried to steady myself, then jumped inside and hit the gas, speeding away as I heard the old man's shouts from the doorstep. "Don't stay, it's getting cold. No one will be here to save you from him." His voice faded into the distance, and the children said nothing. I felt 6 pairs of eyes staring at me, the dogs and all of theirs. "I'm sorry, boys," I stammered. "He's not usually like that." "Does that make us feel better?" Peter, the troublemaker, yelled from the back seat. I didn't know what to say. The whole weekend seemed to be going off track. Was he right? Should we turn back? I'd have to check the weather forecast when we arrived, but this morning before we left, it still reported good weather. Still, this felt like a bad omen. "The old man probably forgot to take his medication," Steve muttered. "Or he's self-medicating too much with some questionable legal mushrooms." Gibson whined at me from the passenger seat, sitting up and staring, eyes wide and anxious. I kept left at the fork, and the tires spun a few times in the icy mud, but we eventually made it up the slope leading to the cabin. Trees encircled us on both sides, and the surroundings felt oppressively suffocating in a way that vaguely unsettled me. It was real because I always loved the woods there. We passed other cabins and saw no one else on the lake, at least not yet. I still hoped for some ice fishermen who occasionally visited in the colder months. At least that's what my uncle said. He loved ice fishing too and sometimes came to the lake in winter. The lake pressed in on both sides as we neared the cabin and started driving down the narrow peninsula. At its lowest point, the water was only a foot away on each side, and this section occasionally flooded, making it impassable. Finally, we drove over a small rise, rounded the bend, and the cabin appeared. The kids groaned from the back seat when they saw it. "This is it, just a crummy shack." "I told you it wasn't much, boys." It was a bit irritating to hear them criticize the family cabin, but they were just kids, so I let it go. I turned the car around in a slightly wider spot we used for that purpose and backed the van right up to the front door to unload. I felt relieved again when I looked out at the lake and saw an ice fishing hut. It looked well maintained, and there were footprints leading to and around it. We weren't alone after all. Someone else would be on the lake this weekend, and in case of an emergency, I could ask them for help. Like if the car battery died, for example. It's not like we could call for help here, and phone signal on the lake was very weak. "Look, boys, ice fishermen. Maybe they can show us how to drill holes in the ice." "What, you don't know how, Dad?" It was Peter again. "My dad said any fool can drill an ice fishing hole." I tried to think of a witty retort but came up empty. Instead, I muttered something and got out to shut the car door. The damn kid was starting to get on my nerves. Gibson followed close at my heels as I unlocked the cabin door and stepped inside. It was cold in there, but at least there was no wind. The wind was blowing quite strongly from the lake, and it felt freezing outside. I walked around the cabin, checking every room for wildlife and weather damage. We always had problems with mice and occasionally a squirrel getting in. But the place was fine, no damage from the early storms. Just standard mouse droppings, spiderwebs, and spiders. My first priority was to get wood for the fireplace and start warming the cabin. We'd keep the fire going continuously, and I'd have to constantly remind the kids to add wood and close the front and back doors to keep warm. I went to the front door and saw the kids had already built snow forts about 15 feet apart. They were also stockpiling snowballs for the upcoming battle. Since there were 5 of them, it would be 3 against 2. A bit uneven, and the snow forts already showed it, as the one on the right was bigger. No need to interrupt, I decided, and went to get firewood myself. Childhood only happens once. I'd start the fire while they played. In another hour or two, they'd have to start pitching tents, because it gets dark early here. I found some dry wood under the cabin where we stored our pile, but kindling for starting a fire was another matter. Dry, small pieces of wood were hard to find, and by the time I'd found enough, my feet were starting to freeze and go numb. Back in the cabin, Gibson watched me arrange a small teepee structure in the fireplace. He'd been playing with the kids for a while, but now followed me and watched closely. I couldn't shake the feeling he was worried about something. The wood was a bit damp, and it took a while to catch fire, but eventually I managed. I realized I'd have to keep an eye on it because the fire was temperamental, flickering on and off. I went outside to call the kids in from their snowball fight. They groaned for a moment, then came to the cabin's front door, faces red from the cold, but still showing no signs of wanting to come inside. I spoke from the top of the stairs about my expectations. They needed to start pitching tents immediately because it would be dark in a few hours. 3 of them would sleep out tonight, 2 tomorrow, since we only had 1 tent. Who volunteers for the first night? I noticed Peter, the troublesome one, repeatedly not volunteering for the first night. Greg, Steve, and Ricky raised their hands after a few seconds of hesitation. All right, so tonight it'll be Greg, Ricky, and Steve, Peter and Jeff tomorrow. So you 2 will be in the cabin with Dad and Gibson tonight. Help them set up their tent, then all come inside and warm up by the fire for a bit. They reluctantly agreed, and I went back inside, leaving them to their work. I remembered how terribly cold it was when I earned my winter camping badge. I wore my shoes all night and was afraid to go outside to pee, thinking I wouldn't be able to warm up afterward. But I also remembered the feeling of truly accomplishing something afterward, and I was proud of it. I checked the fire. It was about to go out again, and I poked it for a few minutes, then added new wood. Everything was a bit damp, and at this rate, the cabin would never get warm. I looked over and saw Gibson was shivering. I pulled him close and held him near the fire as I warmed my hands. The kettle caught my eye, and I remembered something called hot chocolate. What better way to bribe the kids into thinking I was a good scout leader and a professional adult? I filled the old, blackened kettle with water and put it on the stove to boil, then got the instant chocolate mix from our provisions. The room started to warm up a little, which was nice. But I still wore my hat and gloves. At least the dog wasn't shivering anymore. When the kids came inside, I had hot chocolate ready, and they gulped it down without complaint, taking turns warming their hands by the fire and playing with the dog. Suddenly, there were wet footprints all over the cabin. Even though I constantly reminded them to take off their shoes before coming in, I decided to ignore it and got out my guitar while the kids made hot dogs and roasted marshmallows on the small stove. The cabin was warm and bright with the flickering light of half a dozen oil lamps. My heart nearly stopped every time the kids got close to one, and I constantly yelled at them to be careful because knocking one over could easily kill us all. As night fell and after we finished singing and eating roasted hot dogs, I decided it was time for bed. The 3 boys, including my son, Greg, were sent out into the cold winter air to sleep in the tent to earn their winter camping badges. I felt deep regret and anxiety as I sent the 3 of them out. Gibson started whining and scratching at the back door after they left and didn't leave that spot. He dozed off on the wet doormat that night. I found it very hard to sleep. The fire kept going out, and I kept having to get up to add more wood and try to get it going again. Gibson finally got too cold and came closer to the fire as I poked it, trying to get more heat from the embers. He was shivering, and I brought him up onto the sofa bed with me. Peter and Jeff were sleeping on camping cots near the fire and looked warm enough in their sleeping bags. But I was freezing because I kept having to get up to manage the fire. I tried to drift off into a fitful sleep and had a terrible nightmare. Something was scratching at the cabin windows and doors. The wind howled outside, and the fire had long since gone out. In my dream, I got out of bed and saw the two boys had frozen to death in their camping cots. They were purple with hypothermia, and frost was everywhere in the cabin. The windows were covered in ice that was spreading rapidly like time-lapse mold. Tap, tap, tap. Someone or something was scratching at the windows and doors from all sides. The sound was like fingernails on a chalkboard, like something with long claws or nails dragging across the surface. My heart pounded, my throat dry. I woke up with a start, sitting upright, my body drenched in a cold sweat. Tap, 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 that sound. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. My stomach felt like a lead ball as I walked to the door. Gibson was frantically scratching at it. At first, I thought he just needed to pee, but then I heard screaming from outside. "They're gone, Uncle Greg and Ricky and Steve. They're gone, where did they go?" I ran to the tent through the fresh snowfall. There were no tracks indicating anyone had come to take them. Nothing to suggest they had walked away early in the morning. They had just vanished. The sleeping bags were empty, and the tent was abandoned. Gibson looked at me with big, anxious brown eyes. "I don't know, boys, but they'll come back. Maybe they just went for a walk or something." But a part of me knew that wasn't true. The weather was bitterly cold, and a voice in my head whispered, "You shouldn't have stayed here. You should have left when you had the chance." I realized I was lying face down in the snow, and someone, a child, was yelling at me. Uncle Greg, are you okay? Oh God, now he's asterisk passed out too. What kind of scout leader is this?" I struggled to my feet, and the world spun. Davy looked at me worriedly, along with Jeff and Peter, the two remaining scouts of the troop that had started with 5. My son, as well as the other two, Ricky and Steve, were now gone. They had vanished into the night, dissolved without a trace in the blizzard. They wanted to earn their winter camping badges, which required sleeping outdoors in a tent in winter. But last night was terribly cold, and we had also been hit by a heavy snowstorm, blanketing the lake in a huge amount of fresh snow. Why didn't I notice it happening? I should have checked on them. I realized I hadn't even gone to check. Who knew how long they had been missing? What kind of scout leader was I? What kind of father? The kids were yelling at me, but I only heard it as vague background noise, mixed with my chronic tinnitus. That's when I looked out at the lake and saw the ice fishing hut. Maybe the kids had gone there. Of course. It was cold in the tent, and they decided to see if they could cheat by sneaking into the warmth of the ice fishing hut. Their footprints would just be covered by the fresh snow. I ran down to the lake and onto the ice, running as fast as I could through the snow towards the ice fishing hut. Running across the ice and through the thick snow took a while, but eventually I reached the small hut and opened the door, praying the 3 boys would be inside. The door opened, and snow blew in. No one was in the hut, but the inside was covered in blood. It was frozen on the walls and ceiling. The hole in the ice had been covered by blowing snow, and the place looked abandoned. I saw a stack of 6 unopened beer cans on the floor in the corner, frozen in a pool of congealed blood. Fishing tackle and rods lay scattered everywhere, but no sign of anyone other than the blood. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt unable to focus, overwhelmed by horror for my son and for myself, if I was honest. Whoever did this was a violent madman. Unless it's an animal, perhaps a wolf, my mind grappled with the possibilities. Maybe the person in the ice fishing hut had harmed the boys and taken them somewhere. The remaining children were shouting something from the shore, and I heard their voices, urgent and panicked. "Uncle Greg?" I looked back and saw Mr. Dreyer there, yanking Peter's wrist while Jeff wildly swung at him, helplessly punching him in the stomach. "Stop it," Jeff yelled. "You have to go, you have to leave here. This place isn't safe." As I ran back to shore, I saw dark clouds gathering, the sky filled with them, coming from the end of the lake, and with them, a strong, cold wind, almost knocking me over as I ran through the snow. It blurred my vision, and I couldn't see what was happening with the kids. What the hell is he doing to them? My face was numb and somehow both prickly with pain and aching at the same time. The wind was suddenly very cold. I pulled up my jacket as I ran and yelled at the crazy old man to leave the kids alone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached them and pulled him off Peter. I pushed hard, and the old man fell to the ground, looking defiant and angry as he struggled to get up in the deep snow. He had hurt Peter's arm, and Peter was screaming, and I saw it was indeed hanging at an unnatural angle by his side. Jeff was also crying and screaming, and Gibson barked, occasionally trying to bite Mr. Dryer's leg. His pants were torn from its teeth, and I saw his sock was soaked with blood from the bite. "Get your damn animal off me," he screamed, crawling backward in the snow away from it. "It's following him, it's following his asterisk orders." I grabbed Gibson's collar, not out of concern for the old man's safety, but for the dog's. "What the hell happened? This madman took the kids. Where are they? What did you do to my son?" His face broke into a wide, high grin like a clown's. His front teeth were large, and his lips were red from the cold, chapped and cracked, with tight, dry, bleeding skin. "He took them, not me. He took them. Yes." For some reason, I didn't believe him. Don't ask me why, perhaps because he had just tried to abduct the 2 remaining children. I made him lead us to his cabin. I tried to start the van, but it wouldn't turn over, as if the battery was dead. This brought me close to complete panic, but I took a deep breath to try and calm down and focus. We needed to get out of here. I realized a storm was rolling in. We'd had a bit of it overnight, but now I could see the dark clouds very close and threatening. Snow had already started falling again. We made him walk ahead so we could keep an eye on him. Peter screamed the whole way, clutching his arm. I just hoped Mr. Dryer's car was better equipped for the snow and could get us out of here. He would get his wish, and we would leave if we could, and we'd take him straight to the nearest police station. But when we got to his cabin after a long internal trek through the snow, the kids weren't there. We searched the entire cabin and found nothing. I asked him more, but he clearly refused to speak. I worried he might have hidden them in a shed somewhere in the woods or perhaps in another cabin he had keys to. I worried they might be tied up somewhere, freezing colder by the minute as this madman delayed us with his nonsense. His car keys were hanging on a hook next to the front door, so I tried to start it, thinking we could drive around to the other cabins, at least to check if the boys were there. But the car wouldn't start. Mr. Dryer started laughing when I went to open the hood. I knew almost nothing about cars, but I knew when all the spark plugs were missing. "You bastard, where are they, the kids or the plugs?" he giggled. We trudged back to our cabin. Snow was really starting to fall. It was hard to see in the continuous white haze of the blizzard, and I told the kids to stay close behind me in single file. I told them to keep an eye on each other, a buddy system of sorts. We were freezing by the time we got back to the cabin. Peter seemed to be in shock, and I realized I had no choice. We'd have to ride it out, hoping the boys would return on their own. Maybe they went hiking, but I seriously doubted it. Mr. Dryer didn't resist when I tied him to a chair. I told him it was just for a while, and he just smiled and nodded, then started humming off-key. I told Jeff to start a fire. It would keep the boy busy and give me time to look at Peter's arm. I had a feeling it was dislocated, judging by his continuous screams and the way it hung grotesquely by his side. "Stay still," I said. "I want to go home," Peter yelled angrily. I couldn't blame him. I dislocated my shoulder once playing football, and the coach had popped it back into place right on the field. Not a fun time. At least he wasn't shivering and sitting there with a 1,000-yard stare anymore, so that was something, I guess. Jeff had gotten the fire going, but the cabin was still freezing. I looked out the window and saw nothing but white. Mr. Dryer continued to hum softly off-key, making everything even more unsettling. "Please stop," I said. He ignored me. The wind began to howl outside, and the cabin walls rattled with its force, trembling from the power of the fierce winds blowing from the lake around us. Gibson lay on the floor, head down, looking scared and shivering again. I moved him closer to the fire and sat with him, rubbing his fur and trying to warm him. I also pulled Peter closer and made him sit by the fire with us. Jeff was still tending the fire, adding more wood, and he was doing quite well. "Good job, son. You're good at starting fires." "I like fire," he replied softly. "Starting fires is the only thing I'm good at." "I'll pretend I didn't hear that. Now, promise me you won't set me or the cabin on fire at least, and we'll talk about everything later. Damn it. I'd have to talk to Jeff's parents when we got back to town. Add it to the list." Peter looked over, eyes wide. "Your friend is weird as hell." "I know," he stared into the glowing embers of the fire. I had brought in a huge pile of wood last night, so we had plenty of fuel for the fire, and at least it was drying out by the minute. It was just a matter of waiting out the storm. But I was terrified for my son. He was out there somewhere. He and his friends had to be alive somewhere. I knew it for sure. We waited a few hours for the dangerous wind and snow to die down so we could search properly before dark. It was already past noon when we heard a sound at the door, like someone walking up the front steps. I jumped up, thinking it might be Greg. I ran to the front door, trying to open it against the wind, but found it almost impossible. With my full body weight pushing, I shoved it open and looked out. Steve was out there, my son's friend who lived down the street from us, but the others were nowhere to be seen. I ran down to help him up the stairs, and that's when I saw his left eye was gone. The eye socket was a hollow, bleeding hole. He stumbled on his feet and looked exhausted. His jacket was ripped to shreds, and his face was covered in blood. He spoke as if concussed, slurring his words. "He came for us, Uncle Greg. He just walked right in and took us like it was nothing and carried us away. He made me watch. He made me watch," he sobbed, and I picked him up, helping him up the stairs. His nose was bright red and crusted with frost. So were his cheeks, eyelashes, and mouth. I brought him closer to the fire, and he flinched when he saw Mr. Dryer tied to a chair in the corner. "Was it him? Did he take you boys?" "No, not him, the tall man." Mr. Dryer leaned forward and spoke softly to the boy. You saw him, and he let you go. That means he's coming here because he never lets anyone go. Never. Only to send them back to their friends for a little while to tell the story, to make them more scared. He loves your fear almost as much as he loves the cold and hunger of his victims. Keep your bellies full, don't be afraid to eat during these hard times. Trust me, you'll want a full stomach. My stomach churned, and I heard loud scratching from the kitchen window, then from the back door, then the front door and the side, and all around us at once. It was the sound of fingernails on a chalkboard, just like in my nightmare. "What the hell is that sound?" Peter whimpered. The sound of the howling wind and the scratching combined with Mr. Dryer's laughter, my dog's anxious barking, the two boys crying, and not to mention the crackling fire, poked by the developing young pyromaniac. What had I got myself into? We were stuck in the cabin throughout the worst blizzard I had ever seen in my life. Peter, the oldest of my troop's remaining 3 scouts, was still tending his dislocated shoulder and watching Jeff, the young pyromaniac, as he poked the fire with a vacant stare. Mr. Dryer, my deranged neighbor, was still tied to the chair and humming a tune that sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it for a while. Then I realized what it was, the theme song to The Price is Right. Damn it. That song is too catchy. I'll probably be humming along soon myself. There were also sounds of desperate, urgent scratching and clawing at every door and a few windows. It sounded like animals, and the noises grew more and more desperate. As awful as all of that sounded, my main priority at the moment was to take care of young Steve, the scout from my troop who had just returned from the raging blizzard outside. Dark clouds covered the sky above, and the trees were bent over by the powerful winds from the lake. "What happened, Steve? Where are Greg and Ricky?" "You said the tall man took them. Took them where?" I realized I was barraging him with questions and stopped to let the boys speak. "We were in the tent. Both of them woke up because it suddenly got terribly cold. That's when we heard screaming. It sounded like it was coming from the lake. We were going to go to the cabin to call you, Uncle Greg, but we were afraid it was a trick or something, and they would catch us if we came out of the tent." He paused, looking at the front door where the scratching was loudest. "What the hell is that, Uncle Greg? What's outside the door?" "I don't know, Steve, and I don't think I want to know. Just keep talking, try to ignore those things. We're safe in here now." I think they all sensed the doubt in my voice because they all looked at me, even Gibson, the loyal dog sitting on the floor at my feet. He had been growling softly and quietly throughout, but then he stopped and looked at me with his big brown eyes. I stroked his fur to comfort him and urged Steve to continue. "The man, I don't know if he was really a man, but he looked like one. He unzipped the tent and came inside and grabbed us, scooped us up with his enormous hands. He was terrifying. He grabbed us, and no matter how much we struggled, he wouldn't let go. He just dragged us through the snow. The snow was so thick that I saw it covering our footprints as we were carried away. And I was worried you wouldn't find us, so I paid attention to everything like you taught. I looked for landmarks." "Good boy, Steve, good job. I'm so sorry this happened to you. It's all my fault, I shouldn't have brought us here." Mr. Dryer stopped humming to giggle. "I told you so, but you wouldn't listen," he said, his voice sing-songy. "You could have escaped if you had listened." I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually have to agree with the old man, Uncle Greg. You messed up. Seriously messed up. Watch your mouth, Peter, continues Steve. What then? Where did he take you? Where is Greg? Is he alive? Please let him be alive. I think so. His eyes were distant and confused. Suddenly, Ricky, but not Ricky. Ricky's dead, Uncle Greg. I saw him tear his throat out and take his organs and swallow them whole. He ate them, Uncle Greg, he ate them. What the hell was that? That wasn't a person, Uncle Greg. It couldn't have been a person. The answer to that I couldn't think of. I didn't know enough about these things. I had heard about snow monsters and wendigos but knew very little about them. Abominable snowmen and creatures born of frost and cold were mysteries to me, but it seemed that was what we were facing. Something supernatural, something from lore and legend, lost to time and believed to be folklore. Suddenly, the scratching from the windows and doors stopped. I realized what it reminded me of, the dog when it wanted to come inside from the backyard after peeing on a cold day. There was a loud thud and a banging sound from the front of the cabin that shook the entire structure on its foundation. I heard tearing flesh and blood spattering. The sound of something being swallowed was distinct and clear. Obvious chewing sounds and loud slurping and gnawing. Something had tried to get inside. Not to get to us, but to escape the other thing. And whatever it was now right outside. He's coming for you next. The monster is right out there. He's always hungry. No matter how much he eats, it only makes him thinner, taller, and hungrier. He's ancient and hollow inside. Mr. Dryer was really starting to get on my nerves. Maybe I'll throw you outside and see if that scares him off, I half-joked. He flinched, but then quickly broke into his tobacco-stained Joker smile again. You wouldn't dare. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had been wrong. I should have listened to him from the start. He had tried to tell us to leave. But then why did he take the spark plugs? Why did he sabotage the van and his own car? I thought he wanted us to leave. So let us leave. He looked at me as if I were stupid. I didn't take them, you fool. He took them, just like he took mine. I went out to the lake and saw the men killed by him and ran back to get out of here. But it was too late for me. He had already put his curse on me. I can think halfway clearly sometimes, but for the most part I'm completely insane. I see it. You think I don't see it, but I won't do what he wants. That's why I'm glad you tied me up here. That's why I didn't resist. Because I hear him whispering to me, whispering in my ear as if he's standing right next to me. I looked over, and for a fleeting moment, I could see a dark, malevolent shadow leaning down by his ear. Just the faint outline of darkness that quickly vanished like smoke, dissolving in the drafty corner of the cabin. And what does he say to you, Mr. Dryer? His eyes were wide and terrified as he looked up at me. Don't ask me, Mr. Grapp, ask that boy Stevie there. I looked and saw Steve had a vacant stare. The noise from outside had stopped by now, and we were steeped in silence. What does he mean, Steve? Do you know what he's talking about? The 1,000-yard stare didn't go away, but he shook his head no. But I had a feeling he knew more than he was letting on. I had gone out the first aid kit and was now beginning to bandage Steve's eye with gauze and disinfect the wound with alcohol. He didn't even flinch when I poured it onto the open cuts on his skin. I saw a large lump and a pretty bad-looking open wound on the back of his head, probably the cause of his slurred speech. I poured a large amount of alcohol on that too. The boy would need a CAT scan and MRI when he got home, I bet. Jeff had kept the fire going steadily, and I was afraid to tell him to leave because it was so cold outside, and he clearly had a knack for maintaining the fire. But I told him to make sandwiches for everyone since he was the only uninjured person not tied to a chair. Peter was instructed to keep the fire going in Jeff's absence, which he grumbled and complained about, even though he didn't have much to do. After completing the last bandage on Steve's forehead, I tried to think of a way to save my son. Calling the police was impossible with the storm, and phones had no signal. And if I left him alone with that monster and walked for help, he'd be dead before anyone found him. The creature was insatiably greedy, at least from all the evidence we had seen. It wasn't trying to get asterisk into asterisk the cabin, meaning it wasn't omnipotent. Somehow, it knew it couldn't get past the doors and windows for sure, or it was just toying with us, waiting for us to come outside. Dryer said, it feeds on our fear. But was that true, or just more crazy talk? You act like you know everything about it, so how do you kill it? Can you at least tell me that? I yelled at Mr. Dryer. Oh, you can't kill him, he won't allow it. People have tried before, and no one has lived to tell the tale. What is he? Do you know what he is? He's a Wendigo, you must know that already, right? A dark spirit, it infects people like a disease, it possesses them, and it spreads. That's the worst part of Wendigo psychosis. It doesn't just stop at one person. So that's what's happening to you. It's making you crazy. Oh, yes, completely insane. In fact, I can see all sorts of complex and colorful hallucinations happening around us. But I'm trying to ignore them to impart this extremely important information to you while I'm temporarily still lucid enough. In other words, please shut up and listen. All right, it's going to make us, oh my God, you actually thought I was going to tell you, huh? Oh ho ho, no, I'm sorry, I really shouldn't laugh, but it's too much. You really are stupid, you know that? I started to turn away, and then he almost screamed, "It makes us want to eat human flesh. Chom, 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 delicious." Damn him, he had managed to distract me just long enough. The wind began to howl outside again, and I noticed Steve was gone from his seat. At first, I thought he'd gone to help Jeff make sandwiches right after I finished bandaging him. The kid had snuck off as silently as a mouse, but there was something about this that unsettled me. It wasn't right. Why would the boy just disappear like that without a word? That's when I heard a cleaver thudding down onto raw meat. I got to my feet, trembling, and walked towards the sound. It came again from the pantry. A continuous asterisk thud thump asterisk sound. Then another sound, like someone chewing a very long steak, gnawing at it, trying to get past the gristle. The darkness in the small pantry made it hard to see inside. I pulled out my flashlight, and its beam reflected an inhuman eye staring back from the face of the boy who had just been rescued. Steve's mouth was bright red with blood, and I saw Jeff lying on the floor next to him. Jeff lay in a pool of blood. Parts of the boy were missing. His right hand was gone, and I saw Steve chewing on it like a chicken leg, taking large bites from the palm like fried chicken. Oh my God. Steve's eyes glowed in the dark, and I heard him emit an animalistic hiss as I backed away, not knowing what to do next. He held the large cleaver he had taken from the knife rack behind him, and I realized I was unarmed and unprepared for this. "No way, I'm getting out of here," Peter suddenly yelled from behind me. I realized he had snuck up and witnessed the gruesome murder taking place in the pantry. He ran to the front door, unlocked it, and disappeared into the snow, leaving the door wide open behind him. "Peter, come back here?" Both of us were still wearing our coats and scarves from the cold in the cabin, but it was still a fierce blizzard. I worried he'd die from the weather, if not from the malevolent Wendigo roaming around. Both seemed equally likely. "No, I'll take my chances out here. Maybe I can make it to the main road and get someone to take me home, but I'm not staying here to die with you." He backed away as he yelled at me, his voice choked by the howling wind and the strong gusts from the lake. I ran out into the snow and chased after him, hearing Mr. Dryer's laughter turn into terrified screams behind me before they faded into the howling wind. The snow was deep and blew into my face, making it hard to see. I suddenly fell flat on my face after stepping awkwardly into a hole. When I got up and looked to see how far Peter had gone, I was horrified to see him being carried by an enormous man, at least 12 feet tall. He was gaunt and terrifying, his mouth agape as he looked back at me and growled. Peter struggled and screamed as he carried him away, and I chased after them. Glancing back at the cabin where I had left the door open in my haste, I saw my dog following me. Snow was blowing into the cabin, and I thought again of Jeff, beheaded by his scout friend. And now Mr. Dryer was probably about to meet a similar fate. Who knew Steve would turn out to be a cannibal? It was all part of the Wendigo psychosis, I would later learn. There was no escaping it once you were in his clutches. I ran after them through the snow. Gibson ran close behind me, always weaving through the trees as he went into the woods and then across the lake. Keeping to the shadows of the tall birch and pine trees, I tried to hide myself along the lake shore, chasing him as fast as I could without being detected. Because he took a shortcut across the lake, I almost missed the Wendigo when he reached the other side and quickly disappeared into the dense forest up the north hill. Following his tracks without thinking, I climbed over the hill and found him striding quickly with long strides ahead. I ran recklessly down the hill and chased after him. His strides were fast, but I sprinted to catch up. Gibson seemed to sense the need for stealth and walked silently with me, not wandering too far ahead or falling too far behind. Deep in the woods, after a while of chasing him, my legs felt like logs, completely numb from the cold and the strenuous effort. I saw him enter a hut hidden in the thicket, well camouflaged from intruders. If I hadn't seen him go in, I would have walked right past it. My son was in there, as well as his friend. If I could save the two of them, that would at least be 4 people. We had a chance of escape, even if Steve was to be charged with murder when we returned. Mr. Dryer was surely dead by now, but that wasn't really my fault. Except it kind of was your fault because you tied him to a chair and left him alone with a cannibal child wielding a crazy knife. I tried not to think too much about that, and instead wondered how nice it would be if the spark plugs were also inside the creature's lair. Now all I had to do was lure the Wendigo out for a few minutes so I could get them. Rummaging through my pockets, I tried to find something to create a distraction. As soon as I touched it, I knew what to do. Taking it out of my pocket, I dialed a number and then threw it into the furthest part of the woods I could. I just hoped it would work. I waited a few seconds, and then the phone started to ring. Softly at first, then louder. It was the most obnoxious alarm clock I had ever used, but it cut through the earplugs I wore when I slept, so I kept using it. The sound echoed through the woods and sent the Wendigo running out of its lair. Clearly, this creature valued its privacy above all else, and the alarm clock on my phone was giving away its hiding place. He charged into the trees on his long legs, and I immediately seized the opportunity. I ran into the hut and found both Greg and Peter tied to chairs and gagged. Luckily, both were wearing thick winter coats, but even so, they appeared severely hypothermic, especially Greg. His face was bright red, and his eyes were dull and distant as I picked him up. He made no sound of joy or surprise at my arrival. Peter was also listless and silent, showing no signs of joy or happiness at the prospect of escape. Although worried to see my son looking like that, I hugged him tightly, overjoyed to find him. He's just in shock, I tried to tell myself. The spark plugs were on a table in the small hut, and I grabbed them, stuffing them into my pocket. I took the boys' hands, and we ran out of there as fast as we could. Meanwhile, my phone alarm continued to blare in the woods. I heard a loud crunch, and it stopped abruptly. We rushed through the woods until we were far from that place. Even though the boys weren't very spirited anymore, their desire to escape was clear. It wasn't until much later that I would understand why. When we got back to the car, I realized he wasn't chasing us anymore. It was as if he had let us go. I reinstalled the spark plugs after witnessing the bloodbath in the old cabin. Steve had surprisingly left Mr. Dryer unharmed. We found him sitting cross-legged on the floor in the pantry, snacking on pieces of Jeff. Both of them seemed unfazed by the freezing temperature and didn't bother maintaining the fire. They seemed to enjoy the cold. He didn't react when I said it was time to go home. Gibson jumped happily into the van, wagging his tail, but then whined in disappointment at the lack of progress once he was inside. The spark plugs worked fine, and the car started without a problem, but the van wouldn't move in the snow. I tried again and again, but it wouldn't budge. The snow was too deep, trapping the van, despite my attempts to rock it back and forth to gain momentum. The undercarriage wasn't high enough, so there was no chance we'd get out of there without help, unless the snow stopped falling and melted significantly. If we risked walking back to the main road and tried to flag down a car, there was a risk of hypothermia because it was a very long walk, and the weather was dangerously cold. I took the boys back to the cabin, and they didn't even scream when they saw their dead, partially dismembered friend lying on the pantry floor in a pool of blood. The place smelled coppery like pennies as I closed the door behind us and locked it. It seemed we would have to spend another night in the cabin, I realized, as I saw the sun setting, and it suddenly became hard to see in the cabin. I would need to light the oil lamps and start a fire. But at least now I had my son back, I told myself with a small sense of relief. For some reason, even though he looked like him, I suddenly had doubts about Greg. This boy wasn't acting like my son anymore. Gibson seemed to notice too. He acted indifferent to the dog while they had always been best friends. The dog was growling softly at him from under the table as he stared into space. There was one more thing I couldn't help but notice. He looked like he had suddenly grown overnight. He seemed taller and thinner too. As I sat shivering in front of the small fireplace, poking the weak embers and hugging the dog for warmth, I repeatedly thought about going outside, sitting in the van, starting the engine, and blasting the heat. But somehow, I knew that if I did that, I would surely die. Not just me, but my son Greg, his friend Peter, as well as Steve and Mr. Dryer. The van was buried in a snowdrift, making it impossible to move, and every minute the drift grew larger, surrounding it and us, burying us alive in the small cabin. The three boys sat shrouded in shadows in the farthest corner of the room, which occupied most of the cabin. They didn't seem to like the fire's meager warmth, and when I looked over, I saw their breath clearly condensing in the air. But they didn't shiver or complain about the cold. A part of my mind kept telling me to tie up Steve because he had killed Jeff, another scout, earlier that day. But the thought kept slipping away like the memory of a dream upon waking. The fire seemed more important somehow at the moment. The low temperature and the frost forming inside the cabin, creeping towards me, made it hard to think of anything else. Mr. Dryer, like the boys, seemed to be enjoying the cold. He was no longer humming or laughing, but just sat staring at me from the chair he was tied to at the dining table. My attempts at conversation were met with silence and hostility. Gibson shivered, and I hugged the dog tighter and threw another log onto the fire. It seemed to extinguish the remaining embers with its weight. Suddenly, it was even colder in the cabin, and the orange light from the fire vanished, plunging us into darkness. "Damn it, is there something wrong with the fire?" Mr. Dryer asked. "Nothing wrong, it just went out for a second." I felt a cold wind blowing from the front of the cabin. It stung my face with frost, and I realized the large wooden door was open, exposing us to the outdoors. But that couldn't be. I had locked it myself, unless one of the boys had somehow snuck through and quietly unlocked the door without me noticing. They had done it quickly in the dark when the fire went out. They had just sat there waiting for their chance. Who the hell opened the door? I yelled at the kids, shining my flashlight around the room and quickly counting in my head. The three of them sat in different dark corners of the room, and each grimaced and hissed at me like feral cats defending their territory as I shone the light on them. They were hard to keep track of in the shadow-filled room. I needed more light, but was afraid to bring out the oil lamps. What if one of them had the twisted idea to knock over a lamp and start a fire? The realization that they were all against me suddenly materialized in my mind. They all had Wendigo psychosis, and if I wasn't careful, I would be next. I stood up and went to the front door, pulling it shut. I locked it again and looked out the small glass window above. Outside it was dark now, but in the moonlight, I could see the snow still falling, covering the van and making it hard to spot in the snowdrift. Getting out of here suddenly felt more and more hopeless. Who knew if the van would even start in this cold, now that the chill of night had set in? Staring at the falling snow, I felt something scratching frantically at my leg and realized I had been standing there for a while. I had completely lost track of time and saw the moon had moved from its previous position, indicating a significant amount of time had passed. I was shivering violently from the cold. I started realizing this. Hearing a sound behind me, I turned to look. The room was dark, but I could see frost forming on every surface and almost reaching the wood stove in the middle of the room where I had been sitting. Gibson was at my feet, looking up anxiously, scratching my leg. The dog was shivering and stared up at me with big brown eyes. A bit of frost had formed on his muzzle and nose. His fur sparkled with it in the moonlight, and I saw he was covered in ice specks from the cold trees. I picked him up, brushed the ice from his fur, and hugged him. My heart pounded with fear, but not as erratically as his as I held him tight. Walking back on unsteady legs, I saw the boys still sitting where I had left them. They made no effort to help with the fire or do anything. As far as I could tell, frost was beginning to cover their hair and faces as they watched me motionlessly. Ice formed like beards on them, making them look older than their years, and they silently watched me as I surveyed. Mr. Dryer, too, was now covered in white specks of frost, and his breath condensed in front of him as he said, "Are you ready to join his ranks, young Grap? He always has room for more in his house. His icy mansion is vast, it's immense and empty, cold and dark. It's waiting for you when you're ready." "Yeah, I think not," I said. "That sounds awful." I started slicing thin pieces of wood from the dry wood near the fireplace. At least, I thought it was dry. What the hell? The entire pile of wood is soaking wet, I realized. Picking up each log, I saw they were all dripping wet. I went to the pantry and found that the entire large jug we had brought for drinking water was gone. Along with all the food, the boys had poured the entire jug of water onto the firewood, soaking it completely and making it unusable. What they did with the food, God only knew. He feeds on your hunger and fear, I remembered Mr. Dryer saying. Was that what they were trying to do, starve and scare me? Because it was working. I sat in front of the embers that had once been a fire. They were only faintly smoldering as I thrust my hands into the stove, trying to get some warmth from it. My hands trembled and shook violently, but calmed a little as they absorbed some heat from inside the fireplace. The warmth seemed to revive my mind, and I could think a little more clearly. Struggling to figure out what to do, I decided to improvise. I took an axe and chopped the dining chairs into pieces, cutting them smaller and smaller. I threw them into the fireplace and lit them. The varnish made them catch fire quickly, and even though the smoke was toxic and smelled terrible, it warmed us. Gibson and I huddled close to the fire, and I kept my hands up, watching the three boys closely out of the corner of my eye. I cut more furniture. Anything I could find, I cut into small pieces. A table in the corner, picture frames and books, board games and decorations, heirlooms and trinkets. Everything went into the fire. The frost spreading in the cabin like a virus began to retreat slightly with the warmth and light radiating from the fireplace. To hell with it, I decided. I grabbed the oil lamps and lit them, turning the knob on the side to raise the wick and make the flames burn bright and hot, charring the wick and spewing black smoke. I didn't care. The room was suddenly bright and warm and full of toxic smoke, I'm sure. To hell with it. All three boys stared at me from the corners of the room, and with the light and warmth came a little sanity. Or so it seemed. "I want to go home," Greg said softly. "How?" I asked him. "I don't know how to get us out of here. The phone's gone and there's no signal anyway. We need help to get out of here. We're stuck." "Smoke signal, Dad," Greg said. My son. His eyes looked human again as he shuffled on trembling legs towards the fireplace and absorbed its heat. Peter also stepped forward, though Steve remained sullenly silent in the corner. "What is it, son?" I asked, hoping this wasn't another Wendigo trick. "Smoke signal, he hates heat. Fire will keep him away, and smoke can attract someone if we can make a big enough signal." The boathouse, I suddenly realized what to do, but the Wendigo would be waiting for me right outside. I was sure of it. Using kerosene from one of the lamps, I made an improvised Molotov cocktail. I stuffed a dishcloth into an old wine bottle and lit its end. I opened the cabin's front door and threw it as hard as I could towards the boathouse. The burning bottle of kerosene hit the side of the wooden structure and caught fire. Despite the howling wind, the fire spread quickly with the flammable propellant, and soon the entire building was ablaze. I saw the Wendigo step out of its hiding place in the woods where it had been waiting for us. It made eye contact with me, backed away from the enormous fire, and retreated into the woods. The fire would attract more people, assuming someone saw it, and he didn't want to be seen by anyone. Once he was gone, and with the fire burning high into the sky, everyone's sanity seemed to return a little. Even Steve looked lucid and remorseful as I saw him walk towards the pantry and look inside. "Oh no, what have I done? Uncle Greg, I killed Jeff." I wasn't sure what to think of that. Had they truly broken free of his strange spell, or were they just waiting for me to drop my guard? I didn't know if I could trust them. As the fire burned higher into the night, the winter storm eased and dissipated until it was completely gone. With thick snow no longer falling from above, the fire became more visible, and its light could probably be seen from a great distance. The sound of a helicopter could finally be heard, and the noise grew louder and louder as it approached and landed on the lake's ice near the cabin. I later learned that others had also visited the lake that weekend. They had been drawn by the pleasant weather reports, like us, and found themselves caught in the sudden storm. Fortunately for us, their phone signal was slightly better at the other end of the lake, and when the snow eased, they looked out and saw the fire, calling 911 when they saw it. Luckily, the fire died down before it could spread to the surrounding trees or the cabin we were in. The kids told their story as honestly as they could, and of course, no one believed any of it. Steve was arrested and later found not guilty by reason of insanity for Jeff's murder. Ricky's body was never found, and I was eventually cleared of all charges because his parents had agreed to his participation and understood the risks, even if the Wendigo was mentioned in the permission slip, so I guess I got off lucky there. Peter's parents told me he was never the same after the events of that weekend, and I could certainly relate. Greg was never quite the same either. He's been acting strange ever since. Sometimes we meet and talk about it, about how their worst behaviors come in winter when it's coldest, when they're hungry, and when they're alone in the darkness of night. That's when they do the strangest things. I truly hope they have nothing to do with the reports of missing people around town, because those crimes are still happening and still unsolved. People always go missing in winter, on the coldest nights, when snow falls steadily and dark clouds roll in, obscuring the moonlight. That's when the hunt begins. And that's the entire story that Greg Grapp sent us. The three boys, Greg, Peter, and Steve, though saved, something had changed in them. Something from the cold and the dark had crept into their souls, and the missing people around town continue to disappear on the coldest winter nights. The Wendigo, the ancient creature of endless hunger, is perhaps still roaming out there. Or worse, perhaps it has multiplied. Perhaps it is within those children, waiting hungry. Friends, as winter comes and the snow begins to fall thickly, remember this story. And if you hear scratching at your door on a cold night, never, ever open it. Thank you for listening. Tonight it's cold, isn't it? The kind of cold that makes you want to wrap yourself up tightly in blankets and never look out the window. This week, the show's mailbox received a special email from someone who identified himself as a former security guard. He worked at a place that many of you have probably heard of, Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, USA, dubbed the most paranormal hotspot in America. He wrote, "Jeff, I need to tell someone what happened on my first shift. I almost died, and the worst part is I still don't know what I faced. All right, turn off the lights, everyone, and let's hear his story." Dear Jeff. The room was pitch black, with only the whirring of the hard drive and the faint blue light from the computer screen. Occasionally, static from a walkie-talkie on the charging station would break the silence between me and the other guard. He was struggling to keep his eyes open, but was clearly losing the battle with sleep. "Does anything interesting ever happen here, man?" I asked Peter, my new supervisor. "I mean, I know most of the rumors are made up, but isn't anything in this place real? Ghosts, glowing orbs, you must have some stories, right?" He had his feet propped up on the desk in the guard room, in front of dozens of screens displaying different camera angles of the property. The billionaire who owned the ranch spared no expense trying to capture the paranormal phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch on camera. But from what I gathered, he had completely failed. "You watch too much History Channel, kid," he said, his eyes barely opening to look at me. I realized he was drifting off. "There's nothing here but a rich old man with too much money who doesn't know what to do with it, and an army of underpaid goons like us, working all day to record a bunch of nothing. So what's with all the body armor? And the stun guns and protective gear? I'm surprised they don't give us real guns with all this stuff hanging off us. We look like SWAT soldiers, which is utterly ridiculous for our job description, which is mostly eating lunch in a box and trying not to die of boredom. Just shut up and stop asking so many questions. One day the old man will wake up and realize aliens aren't coming. But until then, just enjoy this easy job, okay?" I mumbled my agreement and sat staring at the screens while Peter began to snore. Looking at the clock, it was already past 3:00 a.m., only 4 hours until the morning shift arrived. But this was the hardest time of night to stay awake. I needed another cup of coffee, or I'd fall asleep like Peter. And at least one of us had to keep watch for the boss. No one knew when that eccentric billionaire would wander by, checking the cameras and making sure his hired thugs were awake. He was known for his unexpected visits. Since I needed this job and couldn't afford to lose it, I decided to make a fresh pot of coffee. I snuck out of the guard room and into the next room, where a pod coffee maker was plugged in on the kitchen counter next to the mini fridge. Yawning widely, I inserted a pod, closed the lid, and pressed the button for a large cup of coffee. The machine began to clatter, drip, and gurgle before spitting out hot, steaming black liquid. Carrying the coffee back into the guard room, I wasn't surprised to find Peter still snoring. I blew on the coffee and sat down, trying to keep my eyes open and watching the screens. Something caught my attention on the right-hand screen. The barn door was wide open, slamming against the adjacent wall in the strong wind. It hadn't been open before. "Peter, wake up! Why is the barn door open?" I had to shake him a few times and ask again, but he finally blinked his eyes open long enough to look at the screen. "The boss must be out there polishing his ATVs or something. Why do you care? If there was a perimeter breach, the alarm would have gone off." Riding ATVs at 3:00 a.m., why would he do that? Peter's eyes fully opened. "Yeah, you're right, maybe it's a drill. Sometimes he likes to do that to make sure we're not sleeping on the job. You go out there, rookie. I'll stay here and watch the cameras." He pulled his helmet down over his eyes, and I heard him resume snoring a moment later. If the boss is out there, I'm not covering for Peter, I thought. This guy is useless. He seems to know nothing about property security or safety protocols. I worry that if something truly happened, he'd be useless or do more harm than good in an emergency. But luckily, we were on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. Besides, nothing bad ever happened at Skinwalker Ranch, despite its reputation, or so I thought. As I walked through the hallways of the renovated farmhouse, which served as the temporary security area, I found myself growing anxious. Something was wrong. The idea of the boss being out at the barn at 3:00 a.m., testing our readiness, didn't sit right with me, but I figured it was possible. Stepping out into the cold night air, I looked across the walkway to the barn, no more than 100 meters away. The sound of the unlatched door slamming against the wood was now clearly audible, and to me, it sounded like a bad omen. A fat, orange moon hung low in the sky. Its eerie gravitational pull drew me towards the blood-red building. I found myself standing before the open door, the faint smell of hay wafting from inside. Close the door and go back to the guard room, I suddenly thought. Whatever it is, don't step into that barn. It's cursed, it's evil. Stay away. A voice began to mumble from the shadows within, as if in agreement. It sounded like a man, but the whispered, low tone was hard to understand. "Who's in there?" I called out loudly, pulling my flashlight from my belt and shining it into the barn. No one answered, and the mumbling, chanting voice continued. "Peter, do you read me?" I said into my walkie-talkie. But as soon as the words left my lips, the walkie-talkie emitted a painful, high-pitched screech, then crackled and went silent. "Hello?" I said again into the useless device. No response, and I didn't know if he had heard me. "It's just the boss trying to catch us slacking," I told myself, recalling what Peter had said earlier. "I'll just go in and turn on the lights. Then the rich boss will pat me on the back for my quick action and response to the practice scenario." With that thought in mind, I stepped into the barn. My heart pounded. My body knew what my mind hadn't yet realized. I was in terrible danger. As I entered the barn, the large wooden door slammed shut behind me, and I knew I was in trouble. The mumbling chant in the shadows continued its deliberate rhythm as I turned back and tried to open the door, clawing at it and desperately trying to pull it open. A fingernail broke and started bleeding, but I didn't notice at the time because adrenaline was surging through my veins. A moment later, the door itself vanished. Its edges dissolved into the surrounding wood, and I backed away from it, staring in horror at where it had just been. Such a thing was impossible, yet it had just happened before my eyes. I was trapped. Turning back, I saw the thing in the shadows was still chanting and now swaying back and forth. Its silhouette in the dark reminded me of a warlock mixed with a werewolf, holding some kind of staff or scepter. The head of the scepter swayed and made a gruesome sound, like teeth rattling in a bag. I tried not to listen to what the creature was saying because the words felt like worms crawling through my ears and into my gray matter, invading my thoughts. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. Like dozens of black flies crawling on my brain where I couldn't reach them with my fingers, occasionally biting and sampling the local cuisine in my skull. "Get out of my head!" I heard myself scream, but the malevolent chanting continued, an ancient and unknowable language. Clasping my skull, the terrible itching sensation of something worming its way into my mind continued unhindered by my protests. I looked around and saw other dark figures also in the barn with me. Initially, they looked like shadows, moving on the ground like spreading oil slicks of darkness around me. But then those things began to form and stand up, escaping their two-dimensional shapes and transforming into humanoid creatures with inky black features. The shadow creatures moved slowly and deliberately, their mouths agape as they approached me with curious faces. Their features were black holes in their dark forms. They reached out towards me as the chanting thing in the corner raised its hands like a preacher in a demonic prayer. The voice grew higher and higher. The red-painted walls around me began to drip and bleed, revealing ancient glyphs carved deep into the wood beneath. Suddenly, the entire barn felt like a living organism, as if I were in the belly of a terrible, enormous beast, inhaling and exhaling around me. It was hot and humid in the barn, even though the night air outside was cold. The temperature rose quickly, making sweat pour from my forehead, running into my eyes and stinging them as the shadow creatures began to examine me more closely. Each one, in turn, leaned close, stroking me with their pallid hands and judging me somehow. They whispered back and forth, and a few nipped at me with their shadowy mouths, leaving strange, non-bleeding lesions on my skin. I cried out in pain each time, and they seemed to shush me, raising their limbs to their faces each time I cried out. For some reason, I found myself complying. Finally, one of them seemed to decide to take me for itself as the chatter among the shadow creatures stopped, and it smiled, looking pleased with itself. The creature was like a black panther about to pounce on its prey as it crouched towards me. It looked like it was preparing to leap into my mouth to make a home inside my body permanently. Then the large wooden barn door, which had vanished earlier, suddenly burst open behind me. Blinding headlights flooded the space, and I looked around to see the shadowy figures dissolving. The warlock creature in the corner, who had been chanting in that malevolent tone, made a circular motion with its staff, and a black hole appeared in the wall into which he stepped. It vanished a second later, closing tightly behind him. Looking around, I saw the barn around me was no longer painted bright red. It was old and dilapidated, falling apart and unused. The roof was broken and sagging, revealing the stars through a large hole above. "What the hell are you doing here, kid?" one of the security guards asked me. "You're not allowed in here. No one is allowed in this building. It's not safe." "But Peter told me to check. He was asleep." "I never told you to come in here. I haven't even seen you since you disappeared earlier," Peter said, stepping out from behind the other guard. "Lucky for you, these guys came to check after hearing you scream. This building is off limits. Can't you see it's about to collapse at any moment?" "But I was just with you 10 minutes ago," you said. "Don't put words in my mouth, kid, and don't make things up. I didn't tell you to do anything. I turned around and you were gone. To be honest, I thought you went home, thinking maybe this job wasn't for you." I stammered, not knowing what to say or how to react to this. I was sure Peter had told me to go to the barn to check. Was I remembering wrong? Was I that tired? Or had I been on shift with an imposter? How could I know what was real? "It looks like we have a code 278, one of the guards said nervously. "The demon wolves are back." "Don't talk about them," the supervisor yelled. "You know the rules, you talk about them, that's when they appear. Everyone inside, listen to the buddy rules. Need to use the restroom? Buddy comes along. You know the rules, Peter, we have a code black." "Listen." Everyone drew their weapons, and I saw the other guards had guns with strange attachments, futuristic-looking, white, translucent pieces that looked like oversized silencers. I hadn't seen these guys when I arrived during the first half of my training shift. It turned out they lived on the property and were highly paid to be on call, ready to respond to any incident that occurred. "You guys are kidding, right? Demons? Seriously?" my supervisor asked as we hurried inside. Peter looked unimpressed with everything that was happening, and I realized he didn't believe in anything supernatural. He was a staunch skeptic about such things. "Come on, guys," he said dryly. "This is complete paranoia. The kid just had a panic attack or something. You don't actually believe this, do you?" "Shut up," one of the heavily armored guards snarled at him. "You don't know what the hell happens in this place. You've only been here a month. The boss should know better than to let you train the new guy. He almost got killed." I felt nauseous and numb all over as he said that, realizing it was true. If they hadn't arrived in time, who knew what could have happened? Peter didn't say another word, instead just letting out a grunt of annoyance and following the rest of us as the formation began to move towards the door and the farmhouse. He slowed down a bit, as if in protest. Just as we were about to enter the house, I heard him stop a few meters away, mumbling to himself. I paused and looked back, stopping at the doorway as the rest of the team went inside. I held the door open for him, hoping he would follow, but instead he began to shout loudly, his voice agitated. "You're all idiots, you know that? Demons, really? This place is just a rundown old ranch in the middle of nowhere. There are no curses, no monsters. Look." He turned and faced the other direction. "Hey, demon wolves, come and get me. Look, fresh meat for you. Aren't you hungry?" Looking back at us, he grinned, then started to mock all of us. "See, there's nothing out there," he cried out in surprise and spun around abruptly just as something began to emerge from the darkness. It was enormous and muscular. Its form was an inky blot against the starless midnight sky. The sound it made was a deep growl, like a wolf defending its territory, only much, much larger. Its legs were long and towering, making it look unnatural. Its fur was mangy, scabbed, and covered in matted clumps and thorns. Good dog, Peter said, backing away, hands spread defensively. That's not a dog, get inside now. A voice yelled from behind my shoulder, deafening me. Several other dark figures appeared from my peripheral vision, surrounding Peter and encircling him. He began to run, but it was too late. They leaped at him, knocking him to the ground with a brutal impact. It looked like a highlight tackle in football, his upper body driven in one direction, then his legs slammed from the opposite angle, twisting and bending his body in two different directions. As he fell, he looked unable to breathe or speak, and I wondered if he had had the wind knocked out of him or if his spine had broken. I instinctively started running towards him, thinking I could save him. But one of the guards nearby grabbed my arm and pulled me back. If not for that, I would probably be dead. Formation, firing positions, their team leader yelled, and they all lined up in formation. Meanwhile, the demon wolves were tearing Peter apart. One of them clamped its jaws around his face, squeezing like a vice around his skull. The other was ripping at his torso with its teeth. Ready, aim, fire. The pseudo-military squad around me began to unleash semi-automatic rifle fire into the hellhounds. Each round traced a green trajectory across the sky like tracer bullets. Initially, there was no immediate reaction from the beasts, and I thought they were having no effect. But then the dog-like creatures began to snap and snarl at the bullets as they grazed them. Don't stop, keep the pressure on. Instead of retreating, the shadowy creatures snarled and began to stalk towards our group. The bullets barely hindered their advance, as if they were being sprayed with water guns. It only seemed to annoy them more. One suddenly leaped with lightning speed, pouncing on a nearby guard. He screamed as the creature began to tear through his Kevlar armor, cutting through the protective gear like warm butter with its claws. Peter was no longer moving or breathing, and the remaining guards quickly lost their nerve. "Retreat!" their leader yelled, and I rushed inside. This time, without even hesitating. We slammed the door shut and listened to the screams of the guards who didn't make it back inside in time. The creatures didn't kill them quickly. Those who were alive died slowly as the hellhounds tortured them, making them scream for help in an attempt to lure us out to save them. After a while, I covered my ears, unable to bear another second of their death throes. They didn't stop until the sun rose, and by then, the creatures were gone. You'd think there would be some evidence that one of the surveillance systems must have recorded something, but the cameras showed nothing. The next day, I watched the tapes myself. They showed nothing but a peaceful ranch until about 3:30 a.m., when they all died at the exact same moment. The authorities investigated the incident, and I gave my testimony about what I had seen, at least as accurately as possible under the circumstances. The entire incident was concluded to be an attack by wild animals, and when everything settled down, the entire team was fired, dismissed for inaction during the event. Not that I wanted to go back there again. I will never forget what happened that day, and what the guard said about them appearing when you talk about them. So, be careful if you hear this read aloud, because they may have heard you say their names, and they always appear when you talk about them. You just might not notice. Sincerely, the ex-security guard at Skinwalker Ranch. I've heard many stories about that place, but never from such a direct witness. You know, there are places on this earth where the boundary between our world and another is so thin that just a word, a thought, can tear through the veil. And the most terrifying thing is, we never know when we've accidentally stepped over that line until it's too late. The night is still long, friends. Keep your lights on and don't look out the window too long. We'll be back right after this music. You're back with me, and tonight we have another story about Skinwalker Ranch. Yes, you heard that right. The same place, but a completely different perspective. This time the letter was sent by someone who once lived there, not as a security guard, not for research, but as an ordinary family who bought this ranch, thinking it would be a new beginning for their lives. The sender wrote, "Jeff, my wife and I lost everything in that place, but not in the way you think. We lost each other in the most terrifying way imaginable. All right, turn off all the lights in your house and listen to the story of the glowing orbs of Skinwalker Ranch. Dear Jeff, when we first moved in, I didn't know what to make of the lights. At first, I thought they were passing cars or people parked on the roadside nearby, teenagers looking for a place to get high or make out. Or worse, hunters trespassing on our land. I even went out to confront them one night, thinking they had no right to disturb us like that. That night, when I saw the light, I started walking out decisively, despite the late hour. There was no cricket chirping, and nothing made a sound. Everything was deadly silent as I approached the glowing, circular light at the edge of the property. Then I blinked, and it vanished. Still thinking it was just some drunk teenagers who had seen me and turned off their lights, I continued further. The strange, quiet, and moonless night unsettled me as I reached the edge of the woods. There was no way a car could disappear that quickly. Yet when I reached the road, no one was there, as if the strange light source had just vanished, dissolved into thin air. And worse, I felt eyes on the back of my neck as I stood out there in the dark, blind and unarmed, carrying nothing to defend myself. A nearby branch snapped underfoot, and I turned to see the dark shape of something lurking behind a tree just a few meters away. It was dark and humanoid, darting out of sight as I looked. The fear I was experiencing multiplied 1,000-fold the moment I caught a glimpse of it. One thing you should know about me is that I love reading ancient legends and myths, and scary stories, in particular, are my favorite. Yes, immediately this thing I saw reminded me of descriptions I had read about a mythical creature. A terrifying creature. It reminded me of folk tales I had heard about a creature called the Hide Behind, a creature that stalks people in the woods when they are alone and vulnerable. As its name suggests, they hide behind trees and are difficult to spot no matter what angle you look from. They stalk their prey with masterful skill, and most people die without ever seeing them coming. I tried to push the memory away but couldn't. As I stared at the thing behind the tree, I felt an inhuman entity staring back at me. I stepped to the side, trying to get a better look at it, but the angle from which I saw the creature remained the same. It stubbornly stayed hidden behind the tree. Have you ever felt a presence that you immediately recognized was not of this world? Well, it might sound silly to some, but that's what I felt. Looking at that dark shape hidden behind the tree, as it looked back at me, I felt like my heart was about to stop in my chest. My jaw ached, and my guts felt like they were filled with concrete as I turned heel and ran from it. Whatever it was, I was so scared that I tripped over my own feet, falling hard to the ground and eating dirt on the roadside. The creature seemed to sense my weakness, and it moved out of its hiding place. It didn't step out. It seemed to glide sideways as if floating. It watched me for another moment, then began to approach. Its features were only slightly clearer as it got closer. I stumbled to my feet. After taking a few wobbly steps and almost rolling into a ditch, I sprinted across the field and away from the creature. For a long time, I was too scared to glance over my shoulder, worried that if I did, it would be the death of me. When I finally looked back, I saw it watching me from the edge of the woods. Its shape was open and dark like a blurry photograph. Somehow, I found myself unable to tell my wife about what had happened, or anyone. It felt like I couldn't, as if doing so would make everything real. If I didn't mention it to anyone, it felt like I could pretend it hadn't happened, like it was just a dream. A week later, it was another quiet night, and my wife and I were sitting on the front porch, swatting mosquitoes and drinking lemonade. She pointed to the sky, and I followed her finger to see a small, bluish-white orb moving across the padded sky. I thought it was a plane or a satellite, so high in the sky that it seemed insignificant. But then it turned around and began to race straight towards us. Its trajectory and ever-growing light made both of us scream in fear. It plunged towards us like a meteor about to collide with the ranch, its size swelling and its light intensifying. But then, just as it looked like it was about to strike us with the force of a small sun, it slowed down and seemed to observe us, hovering just a few meters away. As the glowing bluish-white orb observed us, I felt like I was dying inside. My bones ached, and pain erupted in my chest and throat. My heart pounded too fast in my chest. I tried to breathe but couldn't as it moved closer to us, its power impossible to ignore. Hovering in front of us, it stayed there for a few long moments. The power in the house suddenly went out, and it was strangely quiet and dark, except for the light from the orb and its echoing hum. All I wanted was for it to go away. Its presence was so unpleasant and disturbing, and even worse than that in a way I couldn't describe. Like a sense of impending doom hanging over me. As if an anvil were suspended by an old, frayed rope above me. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, the orb was lazily drifting away from us, flying back into the sky. Then it vanished in a horizontal streak, indicating sudden, rapid movement. The white streak across the black sky disappeared a moment later, and I finally felt like I could breathe again. "What the hell was that?" my wife asked, her voice as terrified as I felt, but I had no answer. I couldn't share the experience I had just had. If I did, I worried the creature would return, as if merely mentioning it would summon it between us. When we went back inside the house, all our phones, laptops, gaming consoles, devices, and anything electronic in the house were completely dead. In the blink of an eye, they had turned into gigantic, useless paperweights. Over the weeks, the glowing orbs became an increasingly persistent problem. They also began to affect our livelihood. Eventually, I started to realize this place was cursed. One particular morning is burned into my mind. The morning everything changed, and I realized I couldn't stay at Skinwalker Ranch anymore. I stood in the field in the early morning sun, looking at the dead cow, flies buzzing around its head. A strange hole was cut through its neck, the edges clean as if cut by a scalpel. Its jugular vein was missing, causing it to bleed to death, and evidence of that congealed around my feet in a sticky puddle. My wife had named this cow Avocado. I could identify it as avocado just by looking at an egg-shaped black mark on its flank with a white circle in the middle, distinguishing it from the others. This 1-year-old cow was supposed to go to slaughter in another month. Its untimely death would cause us even greater financial loss, especially since 3 other deaths had occurred in recent weeks, each time with inexplicable wounds. The property had been nothing but trouble since we moved in. Nothing went right. I looked around the property, trying to see if I could spot one of the orbs. The sky was clear and blue, completely cloudless, no glowing orbs, at least not today. Why would anyone want to do this to an innocent animal? I thought, staring at the blank expression on the cow's face. My eyes caught movement in the northern sky, and I saw something flash past like a bullet. It was a bright, bluish-white orb tracing a horizontal line across the field towards a patch of grass near some trees. It vanished a moment later. It was then that I realized the herd of cattle was in that field, grazing. The orb was heading straight for them. No longer thinking rationally, only worried about our livelihood being wiped out, I ran quickly across the yellow grass in the sun towards the clearing. The anxious mooing and bellowing of the cows could be heard through the trees. As fast as I could run, I felt very slow compared to the things that were terrorizing us, the malevolent orbs from the sky that came to torment us. The herd of cows all ran towards me, terrified of the blue orb. One slammed into me, knocking me to the ground, and I felt a hoof land right next to my head, which surely would have killed me if it had been a few inches to the side. I got up to see the glowing orb's attention now directed at me. It had no distinguishing features. It shouldn't have been possible to tell when the luminous fragment turned, but somehow I could feel it staring directly at me, and then a fleeting moment later, it was above my head, a few inches away. It whirred and pulsated in the most unsettling way, like too much bass in the backseat of a car where you have no control over the sound. Like a dentist's drill boring into your back tooth after you realize there isn't enough anesthetic in the world to dull the pain you're about to experience. Like the roar of a jet engine from an inch away, or a case of tinnitus so bad it drives you mad. Yet I couldn't move. I could only lie there, feeling like my skull was being torn apart by opposing forces too strong to resist. Is this what happens when people spontaneously combust? Would this alien make me explode like an egg in a microwave? Suddenly, I heard my wife scream something from behind me. A shotgun blast was deafening but had no effect on the glowing orb. My wife reloaded and pulled the trigger again. Then I heard another shot. Again, it seemed to do nothing. At that point, the orb moved past me, heading towards my wife instead. It placed its presence around her, and I screamed at her to run. She looked like she couldn't hear me anymore. The shotgun fell from her hands, and I watched as her eyeballs rolled back, revealing only the whites and nothing else. She appeared possessed as the blue light enveloped her, and her skin began to burn like meat on a grill. "No!" I screamed, struggling to my feet and running towards her. But by the time I reached her, she was nothing more than a pile of black ash and embers in her perfect form. As I lunged at her, trying to save her from the light, the orb retreated into the sky. When I collided with the column of ash that had been my wife a second earlier, it exploded into a cloud of gray-black dust, obliterating all evidence of what had just happened and leaving only a scattered pile of ash. I was left coughing and gagging with her remains, covered in black ash. A part of me couldn't believe what had just happened had actually happened, but as I looked down at the ground next to me, I saw the shotgun she had been carrying. She tried to save me, I told myself. She tried to save me, and it killed her. After crying for a while, unable to move or do anything, I finally got up and let the ash fall off me, continuing to cloud the air around me as I slowly walked towards the farmhouse with my head bowed. What would I do now? My wife was my whole life. Without her, the world seemed empty and hopeless, meaningless. I staggered through the herd of cows, and they looked at me with sad eyes. Climbing the porch steps, I opened the front door and walked into the house. The smell of delicious food cooking on the stove greeted me immediately: onions and garlic, and the sound of a knife chopping something on a cutting board. I ran into the kitchen, unable to believe my senses. And there she was, my wife Christine, standing in the kitchen, chopping a bloody piece of red meat. She turned around with a large chef's knife in her hand, smiling at me as I entered. Her eyes were the only thing about her that didn't look right. Otherwise, she was exactly like the love of my life, the woman I had just seen turn to ash outside. Her eyes had no color, no iris, they were just pupils, entirely black. "Hello, dear," she said, still holding the knife. "I'm making your favorite for dinner tonight, beef stew. Gotta use up avocado before it goes bad." She turned back to the large piece of meat on the counter. It looked exactly like the piece that was missing from avocado. "How did you know the cow died? I didn't tell you." "You don't need to tell me, dear. We're married. I know everything you know. I know all your deepest, darkest secrets. And soon you won't have to remember anything at all." "What does that mean, Christine?" I asked, backing away from the kitchen, but something stopped me. I bumped into the shape of someone blocking my path. Turning around, I saw an exact replica of myself, grinning widely, only with eyes as black as coal, and a toothed smile with much longer fangs than mine. Its teeth were white, as if they had never been used. The knife stabbed into my back with little pain at first. I didn't even realize it had happened until I fell and saw all the blood. The two of them stood over me, watching as I slowly lost consciousness. "What's for dinner tonight, my love?" I heard myself ask. My voice sounded distant and small. "Oh, you'll love it, dear. Your favorite beef stew." "Sounds delicious." Sincerely. A man who lost everything, the glowing orb. They don't just observe, they replace. They take away what is dearest to you and leave something else in its place. I wonder where the man who wrote this letter is now. Did he escape the ranch, or was the letter writer actually him? As the night deepens, the boundary between reality and illusion grows thinner. Be careful what you see in the sky tonight. We'll have one more story after this short break. Don't go anywhere. It's midnight, everyone, the devil's hour, the hour when the boundary between two worlds is thinnest. Tonight, we're taking a break from Skinwalker Ranch to go to another place, a small town called Hollow's End. The email I received this week came from a middle-aged man. He wrote, "Jeff, I've kept this secret for 30 years, but now that I see my son the same age I was back then, I have to tell it. I have to warn everyone about the house in the woods and about what lurks beneath it." This story isn't just about a haunted house, friends. It's about something much older, much darker. Listen closely. Dear Jeff, I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where really bad things aren't supposed to happen. At least that's what we like to tell ourselves. But something terrible did happen, something I've never told anyone since it occurred. Hollow's End had deep roots. A lot of lore and history surrounded the place. Ruins of ancient structures, churches, and government buildings, and other ancient things forgotten by time were scattered throughout the sprawling, forested landscape of our town. As kids, the adults would occasionally tell us detailed stories about the origins of these ruins. Stories often steeped in magic, detailing nonsensical, terrifying events. Creatures coming from the wilderness at night, witch trials, child abductions, and farmers who were never seen again. It wasn't until much later that I realized most towns didn't have such stories. Those memories were pretty unique to our town. As a child, however, my favorite stories were always the scary ones. The tale of a shrine deep in the local woods particularly captivated the interest of everyone my age when we heard about it. Temple of Doom had just come out when I learned about this place from a school speaker during local history class. Most of us had never heard the story, and rumors spread like wildfire about the mysterious ruins in the forest that could no longer be found. Evil things happened there, according to the friendly-looking man with glasses standing and speaking before our class. A coven of witches or some guild practiced their dark arts in that place, holding rituals and ceremonies hidden from public eyes. People had gone missing from the nearby village. And several hundred years ago, a series of questions began to arise about exactly what was happening at this evil temple that existed deep in the woods. The townspeople raided the sanctuary, stormed the dark temple, and killed its inhabitants in the most gruesome ways imaginable. Only the oldest and wisest among them, their leader, escaped. Their identity was never known to the public. Since that day, the town had been cursed, at least according to legend. The patch of woods where the ancient sanctuary once stood was near my house. And despite the scary stories, we frequently played in those woods when I was a kid. My parents would warn us about playing in the woods after dark, telling us never to stay past sunset. But during the day, we were free to explore. It was a wide expanse of forest that seemed to stretch on forever, at least in our childish eyes, and we found new things in it every day. We built forts in fallen trees and rode bikes down steep slopes lining the ravines and valleys within. We dueled each other with fallen branches, played with matches, and occasionally set off fireworks. Basically, all the typical stupid activities kids that age do when left alone in the woods. It was our escape, our own private natural playground that spanned acres. We rarely saw anyone else out there. One summer day, I was walking through it with my friends Brad and Tom. We encountered another kid who looked familiar from around town, but I didn't know him well. He was walking alone in the woods and looked sad being by himself. "Hey," my friend said, trying to be friendly. "Are you okay?" When he looked up, I could see he had been crying, and I felt even sorrier for him. "Sorry," he said, sniffling, wiping his nose with his sleeve, leaving long snot trails on it. "I'm being silly. I moved here a while ago, and I still don't know anyone. All my friends live 1,000 miles away, and I'm stuck here all alone." I put my hand on his shoulder consolingly and asked his name. "Nate," he told me, wiping his eyes. "Hey Nate, I'm Jordan. This is Brad. We can be your friends." How simple, right? I looked over and Brad and Tom didn't object. I could tell they felt sorry for the kid too. "Really? Oh, you guys are okay. So what are you doing? Can I tag along?" We told him we were planning to search for the lost ruins of the ancient temple in the woods. It was early Saturday morning, and we had all day ahead of us. But we had no idea where to start looking, only that it was somewhere in the forest where we were. "Actually, I can help," Nate said. "My mom is a history buff, and I asked her about it after school yesterday. She said it's to the west, maybe past that hill over there, I think." "Wow, thanks, Nate. Good thing you're here. Can you be our guide?" We set off enthusiastically, walking quickly, almost running at first. But then our legs grew tired, and we began to slow down. After walking for an hour or so, the four of us decided to rest. We had encountered a particularly overgrown and thorny section and wanted to stop for a moment before going deeper. I was starting to get tired of walking and was considering saying we should call it a day when Nate spoke up. "Do you guys see that? It's like a reflection." I turned around and saw a glint in the distance almost immediately. "What is it?" Brad asked. "I don't know." We got up and began to make our way through the dense undergrowth towards the reflection. It was so dark in the trees that it was hard to see, hard to move through the thick, thorny brush. But we pushed through. The branches seemed to grab at my clothes, and I had to fight hard against them to get past. There were thorny bushes that tore at me, and thorns poked my face like barbed wire that wouldn't let go. I twisted and turned my head, trying to get the thorns out of my skin, my hands caught at my sides. I finally emerged, torn and scratched, my face and arms bleeding. In the process, I looked down and saw myself scratched and bloody, but I had got through the thorns and nettles and made it through. Finally, we reached a clearing. Tom and Brad emerged from the woods next, stumbling out looking even worse than me, bloody and scratched from the thorns. They were trembling and gasping, breathless from the exertion. "Wow, that was pretty gnarly." "Yeah, no kidding." Nate came out next, his thin body twisting and angling to get through the thorny bushes without much damage, just a few cuts on his wrists. He adjusted his glasses and ran his hand through his hair, then joined us in the clearing. I looked up and saw what had reflected the light at us through the trees. It was the window of an old house. This wasn't a simple shack or a shed in the woods either. It was a dilapidated and ugly house, its roof sagging in the middle, but a house nonetheless. The siding had been painted red at some point in the past, I suppose, but it was a dirty, dusty brown after years of neglect. A few windows were broken, but others were intact. The shutters hung loose and askew, and the whole place had a haunted, lonely vibe that I didn't much care for. "Wow, there's a house out here. Who the hell builds a house in the middle of the woods?" I couldn't answer that question, but I guessed it was someone who really wanted to be left alone. A A shiver ran down my spine at the thought, and I started to feel even more scared. It must have been a very determined hermit to create such a hideaway. This place was as remote as could be. Guys, maybe we should go. Who knows, there might still be someone living in there. The three of us stared at the entrance, and I noticed the door was slightly ajar. It was open invitingly, swaying in the wind, as if waving and beckoning us inside. No one lives here, buddy, it's abandoned. Look. Brad started walking the short distance towards the house, and I felt a knot in my stomach as I followed him. When we reached the doorstep, Brad hesitated but only for a second before stepping into the empty, echoing building. Tom went in next, then Nate, and I hesitantly followed, feeling more afraid of being left alone than of going inside at this point. The wooden floorboards creaked and groaned under our feet as we entered the dark, dusty old house. It was quiet inside, except for the echo of our footsteps, empty except for a few things. An old cast-iron pan, rusty and covered in dust and cobwebs, had been left on the floor. We went deeper into the dark, dilapidated old house to find the living area on the main floor. An old newspaper was scattered on the rug, parts of it lying open on the dilapidated sofa, full of holes as if someone had just been reading it. But the yellowed paper looked decades old. There were a few other broken, ancient pieces of furniture tipped over on their sides, a dirty, cracked mirror, but nothing to suggest anyone actually still lived there. I turned around and jumped, startled, to see someone standing in one of the dark corners of the room, observing us. A person dressed entirely in black, their pale, wrinkled face barely visible in the shadows. I screamed, pointing to the corner where the thing stood watching, but then realized it was just an old coat rack with a crumpled white hat hanging on it. Brad, Nate, and Tom burst out laughing at that. We started to turn back towards the main entrance and saw there were a few closed doors off the main hallway. The first one was next to the front door. Brad, the adventurous one, decided he would open it. I watched as he turned the doorknob slowly and carefully, opening the door to reveal a small, dark space. It appeared empty, except for an old broom and a few wire coat hangers. Boring, Brad said. I didn't share his sentiment. The whole place felt wrong. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up and made me feel nauseous, cold, and sweaty all at once. Nate went to the other door. He took a deep breath and raised a trembling hand to open it. Darkness slowly filled the opening light as he pushed the wooden door open, its rusty hinges creaking. Just an old bathroom, Nate said, looking inside. Do you guys want to go check upstairs? Wait, Tom asked, looking at the wall at the end of the dark room. What's that? We all crowded to look and immediately saw what he had noticed. A piece of crimson-red fabric protruded from underneath the baseboard near the bathtub. What the hell is that? Brad advanced and pulled on the fabric to pick it up. It was stuck. It was then that I noticed long, round black marks on the floor. Guys, I don't think this wall might actually be a wall. They all looked at me and followed my gaze down to the marks on the floor, almost imperceptible in the darkness. Wow, okay, now things are getting scary. Is this a secret passage or something? Only one way to find out. Come on, let's try to open it. We spent the next few minutes pulling on various fixtures and were disgusted as we came across mice, occasionally scurrying and crawling around us and on us. But eventually, someone figured it out. It must have been Nate. He pulled on a chain connected to the stopper in the bathroom sink. And surprisingly, a sound began, like ticking gears. The entire wall started to pivot inwards towards us, and we had to step back for it to open. The cleverly hidden secret door revealed a set of ancient stairs leading down very far. The small amount of light quickly dissipated, and nothing could be seen below in that terrifying pit of darkness. Immediately, I lost all my remaining courage. This was beyond anything we were prepared for, but we had found what we were looking for. We were almost immediately certain of it. Hidden beneath this cleverly disguised house in the woods, existing against all reason, were the underground ruins of the ancient sanctuary we had learned about in history class. Check out the carvings on the wall, Nate exclaimed, staying behind us in the small space. We moved forward and saw there were indeed intricate bas-relief carvings and images carved from stone adorning the passageway leading down. The three of us crowded around the doorway, both scared and excited, looking at the carvings. They depicted horrific images, and I immediately wondered why anyone would want to create art depicting such brutal violence, such darkness. I guess my grandpa was right about the ruins being this way. Do you guys want to go down and check it out? A tingling sensation covered my entire body, goosebumps on my skin. Something about his voice wasn't right. And hadn't he said his mom was a history buff? She was the one who told him which direction the temple ruins were in. Or was I mistaken? I thought your mom said it was here. Oops, I heard Nate mumble softly to himself. Got the story confused. Oh well, it doesn't matter. Suddenly, I felt him push me from behind with such force that I stumbled forward into Brad and Tom, lost my balance, and couldn't stop myself from falling into the abyss. The three of us tumbled violently and bone-jarringly down into the darkness below, slamming and bouncing against the hard rock and its sharp angles. We finally reached the floor below, crashing into the wall opposite the stairs with such force that I felt like my jaw had broken. My ears rang, and I immediately had a terrible headache piercing my brain like a nail through my temple. I was barely conscious, and in such terrible pain that I barely registered the insane laughter from above for a few long moments. Of course, it was Nate. It was him all along. He had led us to the dark temple in the woods, just like the scary stories we heard in history class. I heard echoing whispers and approaching footsteps in the darkness, and my heart began to pound with unprecedented fear. What the hell had we gotten ourselves into? Have you ever trusted someone only to be betrayed? Help someone only to have your kindness repaid with suffering? Well, then you can understand how I felt waking up in the darkness beneath the abandoned house in the woods. The rough, cold stone floor was beneath me, and I struggled to focus, my head throbbing in the dark. Had I lost consciousness for a brief second? Yes, it seemed I had. We were in a house, I remembered that. But this wasn't a house. It was a dungeon-like cave, terribly dark, and I didn't like it at all. Not one bit. And the approaching footsteps made my heart pound like a hammer with fear, knowing immediately they didn't belong to friendly people. There was an abandoned house in the woods. We had gone inside. Me, Brad, and Tom, except there was someone else with us, Nate. It all flooded over me in a flash, and with it came the persistent, throbbing pain at my temples. I tried to stand up and fell backward, losing my balance. The footsteps grew closer. I started shaking Brad and Tom, whispering to them, wake up, someone's coming." Tom groaned and looked like he might wake up, but Brad just lay there, looking pale and cold. He made no sound, his breathing shallow and almost imperceptible. The light from the approaching torch grew closer, changing from firefly size to candle flame, and I instinctively hid myself. I ran to the first hiding place I could find beneath the stone stairs just a few meters away, trying to squeeze myself into the cramped space just before the men came close enough to see me. "Looks like Nate messed up again," one of the men said, laughing. He kicked Tom with his shoe and he groaned and blinked groggily, seemingly unaware of what was happening. "One day the boy will get it right. Cut him some slack, he's still young. All he had to do was lead them upstairs into the pit. That's all he had to do. Pull the damn lever when they were all in the bedroom, and we wouldn't have these kinds of problems." He kicked Tom again, harder. "That's why we built the damn thing. Wouldn't have bothered if he just kept pushing them down the stairs." At least this one's unconscious. There were 3 of them. All wore long, crimson hooded robes the same color as the fabric we found beneath the hidden door in the bathroom. They all began to huddle together as I overheard them talking. Nate was the one enticing children out into the woods to find the abandoned house. They were making people disappear in this place, just like the stories we heard in history class. But we weren't supposed to see the hidden door in the bathroom. I surmised the last thing he said before we noticed the fabric and the scratches on the floor indicating the secret passage we should go check upstairs. So the actual trap, or whatever that drops people into this dungeon, was actually up there, meaning the door we came through wasn't meant for its intended purpose. Perhaps that was how these evil people got in and out of here. And if so, there was probably a latch or lever that would let me out. Maybe there was still hope for me, but I couldn't leave my friends. Despite my fear, I needed to see what would happen to them and if I could save them. Besides, Nate was still upstairs. For all I knew, he hadn't followed us and so had probably taken a different way down into the dungeon. It was also still possible he was up there waiting for us to try to escape. The terrible headache made it hard to think. I couldn't focus and only knew that I wanted to try and help my friends, no matter how terrified I was. So when the 3 men picked up my friends and began to carry them away, I followed at a distance. I felt like I wasn't safe no matter what I did. So my panicked mind, the instinct to stay with my friends and with that light, was all I could say to justify it in retrospect. I wished I had run and taken my chances upstairs against Nate. I will never be able to forget the things that happened next. I followed the men dragging my friends, quickly realizing I would have to keep track of every turn because the underground tunnels were like a maze that seemed to stretch on forever. To help myself get back, I left a pocketful of coins at each left or right turn, heads up for left, tails down for right. The place was ancient in its appearance and more complex than anyone could imagine. There were hieroglyphics and frescoes, symbols and colorful images painted on the walls, but barely glimpsed in the darkness. I had the impression that a great society once lived underground here, unknown and unmentioned in history books. The torchlight flickered and faded ahead, and I had to speed up to keep pace with the men, terrified of being left alone in this dark labyrinth where I would surely wander lost forever. I realized when I heard Tom waking up and screaming that they were hurrying because he was fighting and struggling with them. Suddenly, they turned a corner and vanished. I caught up and looked around the sharp stone wall to see a large room open up. There was an elaborate throne and platform adorned with purple jewels and lamps. Low-hanging candle chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the large room echoed with the movement of the hooded figures. Someone sat on the throne, wearing a long crimson hooded robe. Their face was obscured in shadow, and they sat waiting, looking impatient. Two smaller thrones were positioned on either side of this person, whom I presumed to be the leader of this group. "You have done well once again. What do you bring me this time, servants of the Mother of Many Legs?" A female voice from the central throne boomed. "Two young souls, Mother of Mothers, we bring them to you so you may mold them to your purpose, to the purpose of the Dark Temple. May they bring you many years of service, and may their souls and wills be easily broken." The hooded woman on the central throne raised a long hand and summoned the men to step forward. They did so, appearing cautious and afraid. "Closer, closer," she said. "Mother of Mothers, but the man you brought me appears unhappy." She reached out and grasped the man's throat, and the other two men recoiled, trembling. How am I to transform a dead boy into a lifelong devoted servant, precisely? My heart stopped in my chest for a moment. Hearing that, Brad looked pale and his breathing shallow after the fall down the stairs. Perhaps it had stopped entirely now. "He looks quite dead," she continued, squeezing the man's throat with a powerful hand. And I realized how suddenly tall she was, taller than the men when she stood up, perhaps over 7 feet. She released her hand for a few moments to allow him to speak. "I'm sorry, Mother. I am very sorry. Please forgive me." "It's Nate, the stubborn boy, but I will teach him. I will teach him better. I promise I will make him understand." "You deal in excuses and falsehoods, Simon. Remember this for your next life. This is far below what the Mother of Many Legs deserves." The man began to scream in high-pitched, terrified cries as he realized he would not get his way. She was done with him. "No, we have been patient enough with you. You were told long ago to be responsible for those you are in charge of. You have forsaken that responsibility, have you not? Please, please, give me another chance. Don't do this." The woman still held him by the throat, tilting her head as she examined him. As the man thrashed and jumped, trying to escape her, the woman began to emit a low, soothing clicking sound. When the movie Predator came out years later, I remembered flinching when I heard the sound that creature in the movie made, because it was so similar. The two other women who had been sitting on thrones on the platform also began to emit this low, clicking groan. The sound grew louder and louder as the ground seemed to rumble and shake beneath my feet. I noticed then that the elaborately carved stone walls had drain-sized holes in them, cleanly drilled and dark within. From a few of these black holes emerged the forms of creatures unlike anything I had ever seen before. They were enormous, colorless centipedes with mouths full of razor-sharp teeth. Their eyes glowed a faint blue, full of sharp intelligence, but more so hunger. These creatures seemed to sniff the air and descended in slithering, snake-like movements towards the man who was still thrashing and screaming as the hooded woman held him by the neck. Their many legs scratched and clawed at the air. Tom was fully awake now too. I could see he was being held by the other two men and was fighting fiercely against them to break free, seeing the unnatural creatures that lurked in this dark, subterranean, desperate temple. More and more huge creatures emerged from their holes, and they lunged at the hooded man and began to attack him in a bloodthirsty frenzy, surrounding him like a nest of snakes. Dark red liquid sprayed from his neck as they tore off his head and fought among themselves like hyenas, snapping and biting at each other for the choicest pieces. All courage vanished from me as I watched this bewildering and terrifying spectacle unfold before my eyes. Even from a distance, the worst parts obscured by the darkness, I would never forget the things I had seen. I would have nightmares about them forever. Especially knowing those carnivorous creatures still resided down there, beneath my feet, in the bowels of the town. When the bloodbath ended, the large centipedes retreated into their respective holes, and I saw that Tom had been knocked unconscious by one of the two remaining men. He was dead, I realized. There was no way I could save him alone. My best bet was to retreat and take my chances against Nate upstairs. I could try to get the authorities back to help if anyone believed me. I turned around and saw Nate standing right behind me, an unlit torch in his hand, which he looked about to swing at my head. Startled, I leaped back just as he lunged at me, swinging the torch. Luckily, he missed and ended up stumbling forward, losing his balance. Since I was larger than him, I used his momentum against him and shoved him while twisting out of the way. That was probably the best thing that could have happened, I suppose, because I had caught him off guard, turning back just as he was fully committed to swinging at me. Nate slipped completely and flew past me, then sprawled on the floor. I started running immediately, knowing what would happen next. Sure enough, Nate began screaming for the other men to help, yelling, "He's escaping, Dad." As I ran, I heard the low, rumbling clicking begin from the hooded women again. The walls around me began to shake as I ran back through the underground tunnels towards the stairs. I just hoped I was right, and that was the way out. The entire tunnel rumbled and shook around me, causing me to lose my balance and stumble as I ran. Behind me, I could hear the voices of my pursuers and could see the flickering light from their torches. At first, I had a very strong feeling that I wouldn't get far, but it turned out I had an advantage in the dark, especially since I had marked my path earlier. The first few turns were quite easy to remember, so when I saw the coins on the ground in the open light, I knew which way to go instinctively. This diverted my pursuers and gave me hope. I realized they couldn't see me in the dark once I was far enough away. They probably assumed I would get lost in the tunnels and that I didn't know where I was going. Little did they know I was heading straight for the exit. They slowed down behind me in the labyrinthine tunnels, and eventually their voices faded into the distance. I reached the stairs again and climbed the steep, crumbling steps. At the top, I found the secret door leading to the bathroom in the abandoned house where we had entered. There was a chain on the other side that we had pulled to get in, disguised to look like a sink stopper. I searched for a similar mechanism on this side to the left. Finally, I found it. Pulling it, I heard the door begin to slide open. Then voices came from behind me again, and a clicking sound like 1,000 insect legs on stone, only louder. Looking down the stairs over my shoulder with a quick glance, I saw the man from our history class who had told us about the Dark Temple. He was one of them, probably Nate's father. Everything had been set up to get us out here, to trap us down here. This place was an unholy sanctuary for some ancient and terrible god, subterranean and evil. The mother of many legs, those who lived beneath here had their own system, their own world, and I wanted nothing to do with it. However, they needed fresh blood, and they were determined to keep their secrets. The man with glasses ran up the steps towards me, not yet seeing the things emerging from the stone work on either side of my head. I saw the holes drilled out of the stone walls on either side of me, drain-sized. As the door slowly opened, I saw the creatures emerging from their lairs, closing in on me. Their antennae vibrated, and their jaws clicked as they sniffed the air. The man reached for me, not seeing the creatures emerging from the shadows. He lunged at me, and I ducked just as he did. All I heard was screaming as the creatures attacked him, too hungry to pass up a meal. His blood sprayed onto the walls and my face with warm, dark red liquid. As the giant centipedes attacked the hooded man, I moved as fast as I could out through the open door and ran. Nate's screams mingled with his father's as I emerged in the bathroom of the abandoned house in the woods. I quickly pulled the chain, making the secret door slam shut behind me, closing off the madness it concealed. The cries of pain and terror cut off abruptly as it closed, leaving me with the horrific sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. The sunlight blinded me as I left the house. It had been so dark in the tunnels, but my eyes adjusted, and I found my way through the painful thorn bushes and ran home as fast as my legs could carry me, terrified of every sound I heard in the woods. Afraid of every squirrel rustling in the leaves and every bird singing in the trees, thinking each of them could be a killer digging up from underground to chase me. It was no wonder my parents told me to stay out of the woods after dark. This thought should have clued me into what happened next. I should have realized that my parents knew more than they let on from the start. I got home, panting and out of breath, and begged my parents to call the police. I started to tell them what had happened to Tom and Brad, and they stopped me and just shook their heads. "They're getting bold again," my father said, his eyes thoughtfully distant. "Mom told me it had been too long since another cleansing," my mother said. "They started making phone calls and stuffing rags into old wine bottles, which I assumed were for Molotov cocktails. Guns were suddenly loaded and arranged on the table in an organized fashion, and grenades were placed next to them. I hadn't even thought my parents owned a gun, let alone this arsenal of warfare. I had never realized how cool my parents were. "It's getting dark, we need to move, son," my mother said, strapping on a Kevlar vest. "Come on, tell me where that abandoned house is." Sincerely, a survivor of Hollow's End. Hollow's End? I've looked into this town. Every few decades, there's a spate of mass disappearances, and then everything goes quiet again as if someone's cleaning up. The sender also wrote that night, the entire town took action. Not just his parents, all the adults knew they had been living with this for a long time, and they had their own way of dealing with it, friends. Sometimes the darkest secrets hide right beneath the surface of the most ordinary places. And sometimes an entire community has to come together to fight the darkness. We'll have more stories after this short break. It's midnight, everyone. The hour when all buses should have long since stopped running. The hour when the streets are empty, with only the city's ghosts awake. But what if I told you there are buses that run at this hour, buses not meant for humans? This week, I received a very special email. The sender identified himself as an independent researcher who spent years tracking a strange phenomenon in his city. He wrote, "Jeff, I've made a terrible mistake. In trying to satisfy my curiosity, I may have condemned the entire human race. And the worst part, no one will believe me. Tonight's story isn't just about horror, friends, it's about the choices we make and their irreversible consequences. Listen closely. Dear Jeff, the first time I saw the 3 a.m. bus, I was walking home from the pub with my roommate. It was raining, and we were drunkenly stumbling in our boots, not caring if we got wet. I normally wouldn't notice a random bus driving down the street, especially in my state at the time. But I had just finished complaining about how we had to walk in the rain and why there wasn't a night bus route that could get us home quickly. We were both too cheap to pay for a taxi or Uber. Plus, we'd spent all our money on booze. Why is that guy waiting at the bus stop? Didn't you Hiccup say that Hiccup, all the buses stopped running already? Hiccup, you're going to die of hiccups like that guy in the Guinness Book of Records. That's not going away. Glad to know you're serious, buddy. Why is he just standing there? We should tell him." I started to stumble in that direction, and Tom pulled me back abruptly out of the way. Just as I was about to cross, a bus appeared from nowhere. "What the hell? Where did that come from?" I asked. If he hadn't grabbed me, the bus surely would have killed me. It looked like a normal city bus, except the advertisement on its side made no sense. "Drink bought Gluberton," it read. There was a surreal creature, computer-generated I assumed, depicted on the side of the bus. It had milky green foam whiskers and held aloft a bottle of the aforementioned bought Gluberton. The creature was purple and covered in spines like a sea urchin. It had one large eye instead of two, dangling from an eye socket in the middle of its face. Tom didn't see the advertisement, he told me later. He was too distracted by my near suicide. "What the hell were you thinking, you idiot?" he asked me after the bus drove off. "Shut up about the damn bus, you almost died." We left there, and I looked back to see the man who had been waiting at the bus stop was now gone. An intense curiosity began to grow within me. I wanted to know where that strange bus came from and where it was going. It seemed to appear and then vanish without a trace. I recorded the details of what had happened in a new journal I received for my birthday. This would become the journal I would use to track my progress in finding the 3 a.m. bus. It wasn't easy. In fact, it took many years. For every 100 times I went looking for the damn thing, I saw it perhaps once or twice. The bus was elusive, but it gave a clue if you looked closely, something I should have realized immediately. But it took me longer than it should have. I shouldn't have been looking for the bus, I should have been looking for the passengers. the truly strange people who rode on a bus that operated outside normal hours. So I drove the streets looking for them. And when I saw them, very rarely, I observed them. I observed them from a distance at first, too afraid to approach. But eventually, I built up the courage. It was the fourth time I had seen a particular passenger. I called him the man in the coat in my journal because he wore a charcoal coat and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was always obscured in shadow, and he constantly smoked a cigarette, holding a briefcase in his other hand. These things about him never changed. When I saw him that time, I finally did it. I overcame my fear and got out of my car and approached him in the rain. Oh, that was the other thing I noticed. It always rained when I saw this particular character, but he was the one most frequently seen. My feet splashed through cold puddles, wetting my feet, but I didn't care. I was finally on the right side of the street with the man in the coat, just a few meters away. I was panting and out of breath when I finally reached him. The bus arrived a second later, and the door opened in front of us. In front of us. Cutting it pretty close there, huh? He asked me, his face still obscured in shadow. Sorry about that, I said. In my mind, I had never seen myself get this far. The 3 a.m. bus had always been an elusive ghost, and now I was about to step onto it. Did I want to? I realized I hadn't thought this through. An intense curiosity propelled me forward, and I realized I would die if I had to. But I needed to see this through. I needed to find out what this strange bus was and where it came from. The man sighed resignedly and stepped up the small stairs onto the bus. I followed him. As soon as the bus doors closed behind me, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. But by then it was too late. All the windows were blacked out, and I suddenly felt like a prisoner being led into a cell. What had I been thinking, getting on this strange bus? Nothing was right about any of the passengers. I realized, my heart pounding in my throat. I trembled uncontrollably with fear, but somehow realized I had no choice but to keep going forward. There was no way off now. The driver gestured for me to move past him, grumbling impatiently as he started driving, his black, clawed thumb pointing towards the back of the bus. The driver had a large, swollen purple head and a body covered in wart-like growths. He wore a uniform and a black bus driver's hat. When he opened his mouth to yell at me, I saw rows and rows of sharp teeth inside and a long, pointed black tongue. Come on, you'll annoy him," the man in the coat said, gesturing for me to sit next to him at the back of the bus. I started walking down the bus aisle on trembling legs, trying not to stare rudely at all the different alien and grotesque creatures sitting on either side of me in the cramped bus. Near the front, a squid-like person sat cradling a small, pale creature with wide black eyes in its lap like a pet. There was a tall thing on the right, elastic and wrong, its features deeply set in folds that seemed to make it emotionless and vacant. Yet it observed me with interest as I walked past, seemingly keenly aware that I didn't belong here. A massive beast that looked like it was sewn together from various different creatures and humans sat occupying 2 seats, holding an enormous cleaver in its massive hand. It smelled like a butcher shop and like blood and meat. There were lizard people and frog people, ant-like things and people with cow heads and bare chests. A talking cat was chatting animatedly with another bored-looking humanoid live-streaming passenger sitting next to it. An amorphous blob sat behind the man in the coat at the back of the bus, occupying the entire bench. I sat down and my guide lit a new cigarette, exhaling slightly purple smoke. He had a clipboard in his shadowy hand and seemed to be examining me with interest. I must say, I'm quite surprised you showed up. The last 3 didn't make it. I obviously didn't know what he was talking about, but I played along, or at least tried to. I hoped I could still get some answers, even if I was terrified and wanted to eventually go home after all this. Well, I guess I'm not like the other 3, I said vaguely. You certainly are not. They were much thinner. You seem like you could actually be useful to us. Are there many like you on GXR 1837? GXR 17, sorry, you call it Earth. Oh, sure. I mean, we all like to think we're unique and all, but I'm sure there are a few million people just like me. That seemed to pique his interest. Really? Well, we're always looking for new recruits. I suppose perhaps our methods need to be adjusted. The Craigslist advertisements are yielding diminishing returns. I thought. So this is a job interview. They're trying to recruit people from Earth to join some kind of project. Interesting. I wonder if this could be the breakthrough for all humanity, contact with intelligent life from other dimensions. Craigslist? Nobody uses that anymore. I could show you some better websites. Indeed is pretty good. And I guess Monster.com, but that would be a little too on the nose. I don't understand. Never mind. The bus suddenly stopped, and passengers began to disembark. Well, here we are. Would you like a quick tour before we get down to business? Sure, I said, excited to see what this operation entailed. We got off the bus among a crowd of alien creatures all around us. Slimy and hairy bodies pressed against me as I tried not to lose sight of the man in the coat in the throng. I followed him closely until we were out of the bus terminal. I looked up in awe and wonder at the sky above as we were in the open air. A part of me wondered what I was breathing and if it was close enough to air for me not to die, because we were clearly not in Kansas anymore. Not that I lived in Kansas, but you get the idea. Swirling galaxies and multiple suns shone down on us from above. The sky was a pale green. Clouds were pink like cotton candy, and dinosaur-like creatures flew across the sky above, as well as futuristic spaceships. Ships as large as intergalactic cargo liners took off from the roof of an enormous building that the crowd was lining up to walk towards. I had never seen such a colossal structure. It disappeared into the distance in both directions, visible without end, as the misty haze obscured its far ends, seemingly miles away. The work involved in creating such an immense factory was overwhelming. I quickly deduced that it was the manufacturing facility for Bot Gluberton, the product I had seen advertised on the side of the 3 a.m. bus, as large banners and displays were everywhere for the stuff. As we approached the building, I clearly saw a huge sign with colossal letters proclaiming, "This is the company's central headquarters and production facility." I tried not to think too much about how I could read all the signs and how they weren't written in some alien language. The possibility that all of this was a hallucination caused by sleep deprivation briefly crossed my mind, but then I dismissed it. All of this was too real. The man in the coat led me onto a moving platform, taking us in through the visitor's entrance. The platform lifted off the ground and began to float, taking us around different stations and showing us how Bot Gluberton was made, step by step. This is where volunteers like you are brought into the facility for processing. We use a state-of-the-art stunning process that is almost painless. I saw through a window the other passengers from the bus being led in through a door like cattle into a meat factory. An electrical shock struck them like lightning from both sides of their heads, and they fell to the floor, unconscious. The talking cat seemed to have escaped somehow, but the other passengers I saw fell one by one to the floor, motionless. Continuing, we will proceed to the platform lifted again and began to move to the next station. I was suddenly even more terrified than before, numb with shock and unable to hear the words from my guide. This wasn't a job interview. I had signed up to be butchered. So you're saying you don't want to be killed and processed into easily digestible foam? If possible, a man with no face gave a dubious look, which the shadowy man in the coat was giving me. He stood there, waiting for a response from me, while we moved from station to station on a floating platform, giving us a tour of the central BT Gluberton production facility. This place was colossal inside, larger than any city on Earth. I decided it was time to be frank and honest, as pretending and lying had almost gotten me killed in this random interdimensional adventure. No, I don't want to. Please don't kill and eat me. I only got on that bus because it looked so strange, and buses shouldn't come at that time of night. And I was just curious, and oh hell, I'm going to die here, aren't I? The words tumbled out of me faster than I could think. All I knew was that if this guy didn't help me, I was going to be turned into food, become part of the indiscriminate green goo sold throughout the multiverse as Gluberton foam. All right, calm down. If you don't want to be part of the alliance, just say so, the man in the coat said, sounding judgmental. Hugh, so I'm not going to be turned into foam, I can go home. Of course, we're not savages, so that's a relief. What were you saying about the alliance? Well, I don't usually explain these things to outsiders, but it doesn't really matter now anyway. The platform took off again and moved to a station with a window overlooking the production floor. Shiny, high-tech machinery could be seen filling containers of every conceivable shape and size with green foam. There were things like toothpaste tubes, mayonnaise jar-sized containers, barrels and tubs and buckets ranging from enormous to water tower-sized vats. From this central processing location, we feed an entire quadrant of the multiverse. All participating member planets receive enough supplies for their dominant species to survive and thrive. Once a member planet's carrying capacity is reached, we begin to remove the surplus for production. It's a win-win for all parties involved, assuming your species is compatible with the foaming process. It took me a minute to grasp what he was saying. So, what you're telling me is that every planet eats nothing but Globerton foam? They don't have to worry about food anymore, or liquids for water. In the case of your planet, the foam also hydrates and can be formulated to any specifications to maximize usefulness. All minerals, vitamins, amino acids, and supplements needed to prevent disease and prolong life are researched and provided. The benefits of Alliance membership extend far beyond that, of course. Food provision is just the beginning. Wow, so you provide all that stuff, and in return, we give you people who you can kill and turn into more Glubton foam. Basically. Yes, by voluntarily undergoing processing, you take the first step towards joining the Alliance, a sacrifice to show your planet's willingness to give and take, to be part of this great communion. But now, sadly, yes. 4 strikes and you're out, as we say. Wait, so that was Earth's last chance. Wait, so people volunteered to be eaten. Yes, as I said, Craigslist, but alas, they just said they wanted to be eaten, and then they never showed up. Very unusual and quite rude, if you ask me. The platform lifted again and moved to another station where we could watch Globerton foam being palletized and stacked and moved by floating forklifts. All right, I can safely say that Earth is not interested in this proposal. We don't eat each other where I come from. He let out a slightly annoyed sound. Ah, so you've got it all figured out then. Good for you. Not that I haven't seen worlds like yours before. All of you will die within you know what? Forget it, I won't waste my time. I could tell he was getting annoyed with me. Better try to mend fences, I told myself, or you'll really piss him off and end up stuck here. He's your only way back. Look, I'm sorry. That probably sounded judgmental. We're just not ready for this as a species, I guess, but hey, give us another 50 years and we'll be begging to be turned into foam. He turned and crossed his arms. Really? You mean that? Maybe. I'm doing calculations in my head, trying to figure out how old I'd be in 50 years. 85, so probably dead. Definitely 50 years or maybe like 60. A little more, but we'll get there. What do you think? Will you help me get home? I would really, really appreciate it. It smells like blood in here, like a lot of blood. Yes, the metallic scent is intensifying as we go deeper into the factory. We are now at a window overlooking the slaughter floor. All right, this is the last stop. After that, I'll direct you back to the bus. But we can't make this thing move any faster, so we're stuck here for a minute. Might as well watch the show. Oh look, they're butchering a Farfie Newton. This should be interesting. I tasted acid and bile rising unpleasantly in my throat as I watched, too horrified and dazed to turn away. They were cutting the enormous green alien creature's pale belly open with a sharp knife. One of the workers held the edges of the open wound so another could climb inside and begin pulling out the gigantic beast's intestines. It was the size of an elephant compared to them. Oh no, clearly another batch wasn't paying attention in safety training, the man in the coat said, shifting nervously. The worker who had climbed inside the gigantic alien creature's belly suddenly screamed, and the others ran to assist him. Tentacles wrapped around him and sucked him deeper into the dead giant beast's belly, swallowing him like quicksand as he struggled and screamed. Hold on a second, I'll be right back, the man in the coat said. He pressed a button, and the glass panel turned to liquid, and he stepped right through it, much to my surprise, leaving me alone on the floating platform. He went to the team and began yelling at them, telling them to stop. Blood began to spray from the center of the giant beast, and teeth could be seen chewing on the worker who had been pulled inside. I was watching anxiously, waiting for him to return when suddenly the platform started to move again. It seemed to be timed and programmed to move to the next station on the factory tour. Hey, man in the coat, I yelled, but it was too late. I was left alone on the platform as it moved to the final stopping point of the tour. It had taken us full circle, back to the line leading to the slaughter floor. I tried to squeeze through the crowd of alien creatures surrounding me on all sides, but found myself swept along towards the slaughter floor. Soon I was trapped in the fast-moving line leading to the stunning device I had seen earlier. Screaming, I frantically tried to break free from the line I had been forced into. But my cries for help were drowned out by the huge, hairy forms of two tall, Bigfoot-like creatures standing on either side of me. They were casually waiting for their time to come, seemingly unfazed by their impending demise. "Help, I shouldn't be here, I have to go home," I yelled at them. "Too bad for you," I tried to tell them the same thing, the person directly in front of me said. Then he was knocked unconscious by an electric shock to both sides of his neck. I ducked just in time, looking up to see the stunning device automatically adjusted to each individual's height. I had managed to avoid it and half hoped an alarm would go off and the alien workers would come running. But nothing happened. The conveyor belt I stood on continued to move forward, and I watched in horror as each alien creature in front of me was sliced at lightning speed by a series of blades controlled by robotic arms dangling from the ceiling. It was like a meat factory from hell, a production facility created for suffering, watching all the shiny robots working incredibly fast in their task of eviscerating and disassembling the bloody bodies. As I approached this section, I grew even more terrified because the conveyor belt I was stuck on was now suspended over a void below. An abyss on both sides, over 100 yards below, where a mesh net caught the bloody organs and intestines thrown from the blades above. The huge Sasquatch-like creature lying face down in front of me was suddenly lifted by enormous steel hands, and he was horrifically stripped and torn apart. Limbs detached from the torso, quickly the blades began to cut and strip flesh from bone with ease. Just as the blades were coming for me, something caught my eye. There was a cat sitting on a piece of machinery near the conveyor belt. It had its legs crossed and looked comfortable and unconcerned by the dire situation I was in. Screaming and terrified, it then surprised me by speaking, and I realized it was the talking cat I had seen on the bus that brought us here. "If you want to live, you'd better jump down that pipe. The blades are coming for you, and they won't miss you like the head-measuring stunning machine." Without much thought or questioning, I jumped feet first straight down a manhole-sized hole filled with blood and organs. I slid down into the darkness, going faster and faster until I finally landed in a disgusting mixture of blood and organs. It was all the waste product from the incoming livestock. It smelled rotten, metallic, and disgusting. It was thick, slimy, and covered me from head to toe as I screamed for help from the pit of organic waste. No one answered my cries for help, and I felt myself drowning, swallowing mouthfuls of blood instead of air as I tried to surface. Then a piercing siren cut through my ears and began to echo throughout the space. I heard the sound of a drain opening beneath me and took a breath of air before being sucked down a whirlpool that took me down. I couldn't see anything and only felt fear for my life as I held my breath and plunged through the drain pipe, full of blood and organs. They filled my nose and mouth. All I could think of was my family and friends and how I would never see them again. I was going to drown in a sewer of blood. But then suddenly I saw light. The green sky above with swirling galaxies and multiple suns greeted me as I was spewed out of the drain pipe and into a murky lake of blood. Swimming and then crawling out and onto the steep bank, I ran up the slope towards the factory entrance, hoping the bus was still there. The 3 a.m. bus had brought me to this terrible place. It was then that I saw the man in the coat wandering, smoking, and pacing outside the gate. The bus was a short distance behind him. Running towards him, I felt a smile spread across my face. He had agreed to take me home. I would finally escape this mess. "Hugh, I'm so glad I found you," I said, coughing up blood as I got close enough to talk to him. "Hello, can I go home now, please?" He exhaled a pink smoke ring and chuckled. The sound was like breaking glass and fingernails on a chalkboard. I suddenly realized this wasn't the same man in the coat. This one was taller and whiter and somehow seemed more malevolent. I backed away slowly from him. "Don't you want to be part of the product? We could make a whole vat from you, fatty." He was advancing on me, and I realized not every employee from this company was as friendly as the talent scout I had met. I ducked under his shadowy hand and ran past him as fast as I could towards the 3 a.m. bus. The door was closing just as I reached it, and I shoved my hand into the gap to stop it. A painful pinch, but not as painful as being turned into foam, so I didn't care. I shoved the door open with all my might and ran up the stairs and past the driver. "Earth, please," I asked the driver politely. Huh? Oh no. I struggled to recall the numerical code for Earth that the man in the coat had said. GXR 137, I said uncertainly. He seemed to understand it and gestured for me to go to the back of the bus. I was the only one on the bus, I realized. There seemed to be no problem with my request as we started moving immediately. In a few minutes, we were back at the bus stop where I had gotten on. It was the same rainy night, and nothing had changed. My car was still sitting a short distance away, parked on the roadside where I had left it. I got up and walked to the front of the bus to get off. The driver opened the door and looked darkly at me as I passed. Stepping down the stairs, I heard his voice behind me, and as I stepped out into the rain, his words struck me. I would remember them for the rest of my life. You have condemned your planet to oblivion, son. Well done. I hope saving yourself was worth it. The door slammed shut behind me, and the bus drove off into the rainy night into the darkness. Water from the sky washed away the sticky blood and guts, leaving a murky, reddish-brown puddle of rainwater at my feet. The bus was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. I looked for it many times afterward. It never returned. He never returned. Now when I watch the news and see stories of famine and global warming and water shortages, I can't help but think. Can't help but wonder if I made a terrible mistake. Sincerely, the overly curious man. A terrible mistake or fate? You know, sometimes I wonder, if given the choice between personal survival and the survival of an entire species, what would we choose? And do we have the right to make that choice for others? The sender of this letter lives with the burden that he may have rejected humanity's last chance to save itself, but it's also possible he saved us from something worse than extinction. Because once you start giving up lives in exchange for safety, are you still human? Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Tonight, I have a special story to share. It comes from an email sent on this very day, the only day of the year the sender can exist. Sounds strange, right? Wait until you hear the whole story. This email is signed Jordan, and he wrote that this might be the last time he can send a letter to anyone because tomorrow he will disappear again. Let me read it to you. To Jeff and the listeners. Today is my birthday, and that's the only reason I can write this letter to you. What would you do if you could be invisible? Would you walk around naked all day? I did that for a while, it was fine, just a little cold. Would you stalk your favorite celebrities and maybe film their private lives? Don't lie, you definitely would. And I did. Would you steal? Would you kill? Would you travel the world and see everything? How many perverted tricks can you think of? Or would you use your power for good instead of evil, for deceit? I was born with the ability to turn invisible, or perhaps you could call it a curse, depending on how you look at it. At first, I didn't realize my power. It bothered me for a long time. I would be standing with a group of friends, talking about sports or music or something. Then suddenly, they wouldn't see me anymore. No matter what I said or did, they would ignore me. Even my words weren't registered, as if I was speaking into thin air. My parents were the same. I would be sitting in the car with them or around the dinner table, chatting when suddenly it was as if I didn't exist. My parents would talk back and forth about their day, and when I told them something interesting that happened at school, they would just ignore me. In class, I would raise my hand, and the teacher would bypass me, only asking someone else for the answer. Girls ignored me, boys ignored me. I couldn't make new friends no matter how hard I tried. Our family moved to another city the year I started high school, and the problem only got worse. The friends I had made since childhood weren't there anymore, and I was always alone. That's around the time I realized what was happening. I was turning invisible. It didn't happen constantly, but it happened more and more frequently as I grew older and as I became more shy and introverted. I was afraid to get to know anyone, afraid to talk to anyone. All I thought was, if I made new friends, they would start ignoring me at some point, and I would be alone again. So I just wandered the hallways at lunch in school, feeling lonely and invisible. I got through high school and college, blending into the walls and growing more and more lonely. I dreaded mandatory social interaction through any group projects I was assigned. The idea of interacting with other humans directly became increasingly terrifying to me. A part of me felt like I could become invisible and never be seen again, forced to roam the earth like a ghost for the rest of my life. Each time I vanished, I was sure it would be permanent, and it was never voluntary. But each time I vanished, I would reappear afterward. The worst part was I couldn't tell when it was happening. I could always see myself no matter what. After college, I got a job that didn't require interacting with anyone, except occasionally with coworkers and my boss. Most conversations were via email, and even those were ignored half the time. Even as an adult, no one talked to me in the office or invited me for drinks with the group after work. Meetings proceeded without me, and everyone walked past my desk each morning without greeting me, as if I didn't exist. Some time ago, my greatest fear finally happened. My boss called my cell phone in the middle of the workday. I missed the call because I had set my phone to Zoom, and I looked down to see the notification. I was about to go into his office to talk to him, but then he came out and started yelling loudly. "Where's Jordan? Has anyone seen him? Every time I need his help, he's nowhere to be found." He sounded angry. I stood up and raised my hand. "I'm here, Mr. Jacobson." "What do you need help with?" No one heard me. Another coworker, a guy named Brad who always hated me, stood up and began to complain about my absence. "I don't know where he is, sir. Every time I look over at his desk, it's conspicuously empty. I was going to tell you, but I don't like to complain about coworkers, but now it's too much." Mr. Jacobson shook his head, mumbled, and walked towards his office. "One more call. If he doesn't answer this time, I'm firing him on the spot." I hurried after him, leaving my phone on my desk. "Sir, wait, please, I'm right here." He slammed the door in my face. I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. I knocked and yelled, but he didn't answer. When I got back to my desk, another voicemail was waiting for me. This time, it said I was fired for unexplained absence. It seemed useless to try and stop what was happening. I just silently packed my things and left. No one noticed. The periods of invisibility grew longer and longer, until eventually I realized I could only be seen one day a year. The rest of the 364 days of the year, I was a ghost. It was always the same day and easy enough to remember, my birthday. It made sense. People noticed me on that day and remembered me, even if only for 24 hours. I received calls from my parents, a few Facebook messages, but that was it. Still, the feeling of existing again was wonderful. I no longer had a job, so I had to get creative about making money. I still needed to pay bills and buy groceries. Luckily, no one could see me. That made the next part easier. The first few times I jumped over bank counters were stressful. My heart pounded, and I just waited for someone to start yelling, threatening to call the police. But after about 10 times, it felt like going to the grocery store. I just hopped over the counter and took a stack of money from the teller's drawer when they weren't looking. The moment I touched the money, it was as if it ceased to exist, and the bank teller didn't even notice it leaving the drawer. A part of me didn't mind stealing from banks because they take money from their customers all the time without apology. But I didn't want to steal from small shops or supermarkets. I wanted to be as normal as possible. Besides, I was having fun robbing banks in broad daylight. There was an exhilarating feeling about taking money from a bank right in front of the teller. That feeling was like a rush, and soon I was chasing that feeling all the time. Finding expensive goods to steal was easy, and stealing them was even easier. But you quickly realize that possessions are empty and meaningless when you can have anything you want. I took cars from big dealerships: Porsche, Ferrari, BMW, Lamborghini, Mercedes, anything. But driving wasn't a good idea in my condition. I got into many car accidents. People never saw me coming, and driving a sports car isn't fun if you can't drive fast. Trust me. Somewhere along the way, I must have attracted attention. Because one night as I was walking home, I saw someone standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, waiting for me. The man wore a black coat and a fedora. He wore sunglasses even though it was dark. I slowed my pace when I saw him but felt drawn to him like a magnet. "So you're the one I've heard so much about," he said, seeing me even though I was invisible. "The one who's caused so much trouble, drawn too much attention to us." "You can see me," I said, surprised. "How can you see me?" "Because I'm like you," he replied. "I am shadow and so are they." From all around me, forms emerged from the darkness. Some were human, but others were truly like shadows, almost invisible in the night. They grabbed my limbs, squeezing tightly as I screamed. It felt like being attacked by a swarm of boa constrictors. "SHHH, SHHH, SHHH," the man said, placing a finger to his lips, silencing my cries. "No one can hear you but us. Who are you people?" I asked nervously, my heart pounding, looking around at their faces, some of which had no discernible features or shapes. "We are like you, and we are here to teach you to be better shadows, how to go undetected. You have been too blatant in your actions, and people are starting to notice you." Bank tellers notice money missing at the end of the day, and grocery store owners wonder why no one noticed the mysterious customer leaving piles of money behind after shopping, like a ghost visiting the store. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I can't work, I need to get food somewhere." "No, you don't. You are Shadow, remember? Shadows don't eat. They don't drive BMWs and they don't go to banks. You're not a good shadow. That's why we're here to teach you." They began to press tighter around me, and I felt myself being compressed like a lump of coal turning into a diamond. I was shrinking to the ground, becoming flat, and at the same time losing some essential essence of myself. I felt like my personality was being compressed, like my soul was being photocopied into a lower resolution version. I became a small fragment, then even less than that. Never in my life had I felt so scared, so insecure. And finally, all I could see were dim shapes towering above me from my insect-like perspective. I was nothing more than a shadow on the pavement to them and to everyone else. "There, that's better. Now you are a true shadow." The group vanished, and I was alone again, terrified. Being shadow isn't as good as being nearly invisible. I got into all sorts of trouble when I was invisible, let me tell you. I was happy. I did a lot of devious, perverted things. Looking back, I'm not surprised I got caught. I was more shocked by how it happened, and the consequences of my actions were very unexpected. It was a pretty terrible punishment to be turned into a shadow. Especially since shadows never die. They don't have a lifespan or anything like normal people or even like invisible people. However, once a year on my birthday, I become visible again. I get to see my family and breathe fresh air and eat and drink and be human again. Today and only today. I find myself appreciating life more than I ever did before. These days, I visit my parents on my birthday. I visit old friends. I go to the park and greet complete strangers as I walk in the sun. Only real people can enjoy the sun. Shadows never feel it. Tomorrow I will be shadow again, and that is a very cold life. But for now, I will enjoy the warmth of the sun, even if only for a moment. Sincerely, Jordan. And that's the entire email Jordan sent us, written on his birthday, the only day of the year he can exist as a human. This story makes me wonder how many shadows out there used to be people, how many people are slowly disappearing, becoming invisible to the world until they truly become nothing. And more frighteningly, perhaps we are all slowly becoming invisible in our own ways. Each day ignored, each time unheard, each moment of loneliness. Are we slowly fading? Jordan says tomorrow he'll return to being a shadow, and perhaps next year on this very day, we'll receive another letter from him. Or perhaps not. Perhaps one day even his birthday won't be enough to bring him back. Friends, remember to see the people around you, listen to them. Don't let anyone feel invisible, because once they disappear, there may be no way to bring them back. Welcome back. Tonight's final story comes from someone who used to work at an amusement park, a fun, happy place where children laugh and families gather. At least that's what you see from the outside. The sender wrote, "Jeff, I used to be the mascot for Darby's Funland. I once thought the worst job was getting food thrown at me by kids, but I was wrong, completely wrong. There are dark secrets hidden behind the fake smiles, and sometimes naughty children really do get what they deserve." Be careful with this story, friends. After hearing it, you might never look at an amusement park the same way again. Dear Jeff, the costume I was forced to wear as the mascot for Darby's Funland was not designed for warm weather or the wearer's comfort. I sweated profusely standing out in the midday sun, a silent prisoner in an oversized suit as I feigned cheerfulness, dancing and playing with visitors, while dying a slow death inside. This wasn't what I had envisioned when I decided to become a character actor. The costume had an oversized head of a cartoon dog with a gaping mouth that I looked out from within. The character wore a blue sailor suit, a blatant ripoff of a famous duck character from another brand, a fact I was constantly mocked for. "Hey, Darby the Duck," a kid yelled, throwing a hot dog at me and splattering mustard all over my chest. That was the third time this morning I had been assaulted by a child. That was my cue to go take a smoke break. I started to stomp off when someone called out angrily behind me. "Hey, you jerk, my kid wants to see the show. Where do you think you're going?" I turned around and saw a red-faced man with a large camera slung around his neck, wearing a fanny pack and an Ed Hardy shirt. The demon kid's dad, I guess. "Oh," I said through gritted teeth and looked down at the obnoxious brat who had just branded me with mustard. "Darby says hello, little boy. Are you having a wonderful day at Darby's Funland? The kid stared up at me, grinning with the gap-toothed smile of a bully. You broke my Darby dog. Now I want a new one. No, I want an ice cream cone. The snot-nosed kid knew exactly what he had done. His dad didn't see it, but we both knew he had deliberately soiled my costume with a hot dog and was now blaming me. It was too much for me to bear. Maybe it was the heat, maybe it was because I hadn't eaten breakfast, or maybe it was just the kid's annoying, knowing grin, staring up at me, knowing he could get away with murder. I think you remember that wrong, little buddy. You threw the hot dog at Darby. Hey, my kid didn't do that. Don't blame him for your clumsy butt. The kid caught the cue from his dad and started crying crocodile tears. Darby's a big liar. He ruined my hot dog. A moment later, the man was assaulting me, pushing and shoving until my manager had to come over. His face was a mask of unsettling calm. What's the problem here? This jerk ruined my kid's lunch, and now he's trying to blame my kid. I should sue you people. Yeah, sue me for a hot dog, I thought to myself. Luckily, things had gone too far, and I knew better than to say it out loud. I'm truly sorry, sir. Please follow me this way, and I'll take you to the VIP lounge, and we'll bring you and your son complimentary drinks. It looks like you could use a few more yourself. He pointed to the nearly empty red plastic cup of beer the dad was holding. The guy chugged it down in one long gulp and threw the cup at a nearby trash can, missing completely. That's right, come on, Skylar, we're VIPs. The guy slurred before letting out a loud burp. I had seen this before. Some people try to cause a fuss just to get free stuff, but this jerk was taking it to another level. Even the kids seemed to be in on it, and they were going to reward this behavior. No way. I had never even heard of a VIP lounge for Darby's Funland visitors, but it sounded like bullshit, and this guy didn't deserve any of the pampering he was about to receive. I was imagining champagne and caviar, cigars, and high-quality porn magazines. My boss looked over his shoulder with a glance that told me he'd talk to me later, then escorted the two of them into a secret door hidden behind an old tree. I followed them, thinking I was going to give my boss a piece of my mind. If he fired me, so be it. I had endured enough abuse. The dark tunnel behind the old tree was long and lined with ancient bricks. It seemed as old as the park itself. Far ahead, I could hear the echoing voices of the man and his spoiled child talking over the manager as he apologized. I hurried to catch up with them, but then the sound of their talking abruptly stopped. It was replaced by the sound of meat being tenderized, like someone pounding meat, except they forgot to remove the bones first. As I quietly walked through the dark tunnel, the pounding sound finally stopped and was replaced by another sound. It sounded like something heavy being slowly dragged across rough stone. Slow and deliberate. By now terrified for reasons I wasn't sure of, I kept my footsteps as silent as possible, peeking around the corner. My manager was ahead with someone else, and they were dragging two dead bodies, one large and one small, leaving a trail of blood behind them like giant, injured slugs. No way. I must be seeing things. It can't be true, I told myself. A door opened and closed, and they dragged the bodies inside. I hurried after them, careful not to step in the blood trail they had left on the stone. When I finally reached the door at the end, I looked at the writing on the sign with disbelieving astonishment. Darby's Funland Internal Sausage Production Facility. It read, Employees only. I pushed the door open and snuck inside. The room was dark, and I could hear the hum of machinery nearby. My heart pounded in my chest. I felt nauseous and dizzy. I crept towards the sounds. What I saw in the room next, I will never forget. My manager dropped the two bodies and walked right past me, out the door we had come in. He didn't see me in the darkness as I watched what happened next. A huge man wearing a white butcher's apron was sharpening a cleaver. He was at least 7 feet tall, with a large belly that hung down to his waist. He lifted the limp body of the father like a piece of coal, not even straining as he placed him on the workbench in front of him. Blood poured from his head, staining the surface red. Then he took the cleaver and began to chop, cutting him into usable pieces. Each piece he fed into a gigantic red machine that looked like it was from another century. An enormous, automated meat grinder, powered by something that emitted smoke, took his hands, feet, arms, and pieces of his torso and turned them into ground beef. I had no choice but to stay and listen to the sounds and breathe in the metallic smell of that terrible room as he worked. First, cutting the father, then moving on to the son. If I left, I knew my boss would see me running out of the tunnel behind, and who knew what he would do if that happened. This dark secret of Darby's Funland was not meant for my eyes. As soon as I thought it was safe, I ran out of there, careful not to be seen by the butcher. When I got back to the break room, I collapsed onto the sofa. I needed to get out of here, tell someone, but first, I needed a little rest to process what I had just witnessed. But before I could even think, the door burst open, and my manager and a few coworkers walked in. All of them had their mouths full and were chewing hot dogs. And my boss carried a tray full of the park's signature Darby dogs. Sorry about earlier, buddy, but guess what? Today is Employee Appreciation Day. Free Darby dogs for everyone. Eat up. What could I say? Despite my horror, I had forgotten to bring lunch and they smelled delicious. I took one and took a bite, then said with a mouthful, "Hey, have you guys heard they make these things out of scraps?" Sincerely, a former mascot. Darby dogs, the park's signature hot dogs. You know, sometimes the happiest places hide the darkest secrets, and sometimes bad people get exactly what they deserve, just not in the way they imagined. But remember, friends, darkness never truly disappears. It just learns to hide better in fake smiles, in delicious food, in the safest seeming places. Next time you go to an amusement park, when you see a cheerful mascot dancing around, be kind to them. You never know what they've witnessed. And when you eat a hot dog, maybe don't ask what it's made of. We'll see you next week with new stories from the horror mailbag. Until then, be careful and never follow secret doors.